When I woke up in a roadside ditch 30 kilometers from the city, I was wearing someone else's sneakers and had a bus ticket in my pocket that I never bought. The ground was hard under my back, it was cold and dark, and I could hear cars somewhere above me on the highway. I sat up, my head spun, and for a few seconds, I was sure I would black out again. My jeans and jacket were mine, but on my feet were gray Nikes, my size, laced neatly. When I left work, I'd been wearing black Adidas. That detail scared me more than the ditch. I checked my pockets. Phone, wallet, keys, everything there. The phone turned on like normal, battery around 80%. A couple of emails, 2 missed calls from my brother Daniel. In my jacket, I found a crumpled ticket for bus route 47, stamped for that afternoon. I don't take buses, I drive everywhere. I checked the time. Wednesday, 11 p.m. The last thing I clearly remembered was Tuesday around 7 at the supermarket checkout. 28 hours of my life were just gone. I stood up slowly, climbed out of the ditch, saw the highway barrier and a kilometer marker I didn't recognize. And that's when the panic really hit. I knew I needed to get somewhere safe and with people, so I walked to the shoulder and ordered a taxi. While I waited, with cars blasting past, and no idea how I'd lost a whole day, I kept thinking about that last normal moment. On Tuesday after work, I'd stopped by Lakeview Supermarket to buy groceries for the week, like I did almost every Tuesday. I work as a logistics coordinator at a trucking company. My whole life is routes and schedules and making sure trucks don't disappear. That day was nothing special. One driver called in sick, one delayed shipment, some swearing on the radio, but everything was under control. I finished at 6, shut down my computer, said goodbye to the dispatcher, and drove straight to Lakeview. Inside the store, it was quiet. I grabbed a basket and did my usual loop. Milk, bread, chicken, vegetables, yogurt for Daniel because he never buys it himself. Around 7, I joined a line at the checkout. The cashier was chatting with an older woman about the weather. I put my basket on the belt, then looked up when the cashier said hello. She smiled, started scanning. I took out my card and held it over the terminal. Right then, the light above us seemed to flicker and the air felt heavy. I felt a tiny click in my head, like missing a step. It couldn't have been more than a second. I blinked. Everything looked normal again. The scanner beeping, the cashier asking if I needed bags. I told myself I was just tired, paid, took 2 plastic bags, walked to my car, started the engine, and the next thing I remember is opening my eyes in that ditch. The taxi driver kept asking if I needed a hospital. I said no, then started shaking so hard I changed my mind and told him to go there. On the way, I called Daniel. He met us at the ER doors, pulled me inside, and the nurses took over. Tests showed a mild concussion, dehydration, scratches on my hands, and traces of ketamine in my urine. I don't use drugs. I kept saying that while Daniel, white-faced in the corner, told me I'd never come home Tuesday, my phone had been off all night, and by noon Wednesday, he'd already filed a missing person report. The next morning, a detective came to my room with a laptop. On the footage, I drove out of the supermarket, turned right at the main road, and then my car just stopped existing. No tolls, no gas stations, nothing. They found it parked at the bus station, doors locked, keys still in the ignition, my groceries rotting in the trunk. Station staff said their cameras had been broken for months. Route 47 runs from the city to Pine Ridge, and after they questioned the driver and checked logs, nobody saw me. For the first month after they found my car, the detectives tried to squeeze what happened to me into simple explanations. One of them, Harris, kept repeating that people don't just lose a day, that usually they're running away from something or chasing something. Drugs, debts, an affair, a breakdown. On his list, I didn't fit anywhere. I don't use anything stronger than coffee. My bank statements are dull. I'd worked at the same company for years, and I have a decent relationship with my brother. Every time they circled back to, "Is there any reason you might want to disappear for a while?" I said no. Not, "I don't think so." Just no. They still push theories. Voluntary disappearance, some kind of stress psychosis, even the idea that I'd taken ketamine on my own. The first time I heard that, I laughed, then shut up when I saw their faces. The toxicology report was the only hard thing they had, so they clung to it. At the hospital, a psychiatrist sat across from me, and, in that calm teaching voice, said ketamine can cause dissociation, confusion, long memory gaps, especially in high or repeated doses. If I'd been given it more than once, or hadn't slept, it could wipe out a whole day. When I asked why I didn't remember a taste, a needle, a pill, anything, she paused and said that some patients simply don't notice the onset, and that my mind might be blocking details it can't integrate yet. It sounded more like a script than an answer. While she talked about brains and chemicals, the police tore apart my normal week. They pulled my calls, texts, work emails, messages from drivers, old chats with coworkers. No threats, no anonymous numbers, nothing that looked like a setup. They went back to the supermarket several times, talked again to the cashier, the security guard, the older woman who'd been in front of me in line. Everyone remembered me as quiet, polite, nothing strange. The parking lot cameras showed my car going in and out on other days, always the same way. On that Tuesday, it shows me walking out with 2 bags, unlocking my car, getting in, and then the story just ends. No plate hits on city cameras after that. No tickets, no tolls, nothing until my car appears at the bus station. At home and in therapy, I kept trying to drag something out of the blank space in my memory. I'd sit on the couch, close my eyes, and replay the checkout like a clip. The beep of the scanner, my card in my hand, the automatic doors behind me, the feel of the steering wheel. I thought if I rewound it enough times, the next frame would show up. It never did. It just jumped, hard cut, from me starting the engine to cold dirt under my back in the ditch. When I pushed too hard, I got splitting headaches. Once I actually ended up vomiting into the psychologist's trash can. She told me to stop forcing it, said sometimes the mind hides things to protect us. I remember saying, "Protect me from what?" And she didn't really have anything for that. 3 months after I woke up out there, Harris called and asked me to come in one last time. In the interview room, he slid a thin folder across the table and told me they were suspending active work on my case. No new leads, no witnesses, no financial activity, no contact from anyone. File stayed open. Nobody was actually working it. I stared at the folder and asked if he thought I'd done this to myself. He rubbed his face and said, "I think something happened to you, I just don't know what." That was the closest I ever got to an answer. After that, I tried going back to the office. It didn't last. My whole job was timing and routes, and now every clock felt like a threat. If a driver checked in 5 minutes late, my heart raced. I started writing times on sticky notes just to prove to myself I hadn't lost an hour. One afternoon, I looked away from my screen, then back, and 7 minutes were gone. For most people, that's nothing. I had a full panic attack at my desk. My boss walked me outside, then later suggested medical leave. I took it and never really came back. A year and 4 months have passed now. I resigned from the trucking company, moved to another state, picked a small apartment where nobody knows me as that woman from the news. First week there, I installed cameras in every room, and above the door I keep the feed running on a tablet by my bed. I adopted a nervous, mixed-breed dog that barks at every weird sound and follows me from room to room. I don't go alone to supermarkets after 6 in the evening anymore. If I need something at night, I order delivery or make someone come with me. I keep a notebook on the kitchen counter and set alarms every hour from morning until midnight. When they ring, I write down the time and what I'm doing. Daniel says I'm turning my life into a logbook and that I'm getting paranoid. Maybe he's right. But I like seeing proof that every hour is accounted for. The gray sneakers are in my closet on the top shelf, still in the plastic evidence bag the police handed back when the case went nowhere. Sometimes I stand there and just look at them. They're my size, worn in, creased at the toes like someone used them for months. Nobody remembers me buying new shoes. My black Adidas never showed up. And I have no memory of anyone touching my feet, let alone changing my clothes. Someone took me from that supermarket parking lot, kept me long enough to dose me, moved my car, put me in those sneakers, got me onto a bus, and dumped me in a ditch, and then walked away like I was a finished job. I don't know who they are, what they did, or why they picked me, and maybe I never will. But the worst part isn't the missing day anymore. It's knowing that whoever did it proved they could take me out of my own life for 28 hours and put me back. And if they ever decide to do it again, I have no reason to think I'd see it coming. Every night at 2:15 a.m., the same dark sedan would park outside my window and just sit there. This started the summer after my freshman year at college in Portland. I was 19, renting a first-floor apartment in an old split-up house with crappy plumbing and thin walls but cheap rent. So I lived with it. I stayed up late almost every night, telling my parents I was catching up on reading when really I was half doom-scrolling, half staring at my laptop pretending to be productive. The first time I heard a car pull up and stop right under my window, I barely reacted. I figured it was a rideshare or someone getting home late. The engine cut, no doors opened, nobody talked. After a few minutes it pulled away. I didn't even get off the couch to look. The second night, my eyes were already open when my phone lit up at 2:14. A minute later, I heard the exact same slow roll, then brakes, then engine off in the exact same spot. This time, I paid attention. I set my phone down, waited a second, then pulled the curtain back a couple of inches. There was a dark sedan I didn't recognize, windows up, no interior lights. I could see the outline of a driver sitting completely still, facing my building. No cigarette, no music, just sitting. The second I moved the curtain more, the headlights snapped on, and the car pulled away at a normal speed. No rush, but it felt like I'd been caught. By the third night, I tried to go to bed early, but ended up lying there staring at my alarm clock. At 2:15 on the dot, I heard the same car again, same stop, same position. I didn't look that time. I just listened and slowly counted in my head until the engine started and faded down the block. In the morning, I caught my upstairs neighbor on the porch and tried to sound casual when I asked if he'd noticed a dark car out front. He frowned and said he'd seen some random sedan a few times, way too late, and that it was weird he never saw it during the day. I didn't tell my parents or friends, saying, "There's this car that parks outside at 2:15 every single night." Sounded like I was being dramatic. I kept coming up with explanations. Maybe the driver was on break from a night shift. Maybe they were checking their phone. Maybe someone lived nearby and liked that spot. But the time never changed. Every single night from early June until I left in late July, that car showed up at 2:15. Sometimes it stayed 3 minutes, sometimes 10, but it never missed. I started setting an alarm for 2:12 just so I'd be awake on purpose. At first, it was curiosity. Then it felt like a weird job I'd assigned myself. I timed how long it stayed and wrote the minutes in my notes app, like I was tracking something that might eventually make sense. One Tuesday, after it finally drove off, I waited a full minute, slipped on sandals, and went outside. The street was empty. just other parked cars and dark windows. I walked to both corners trying to guess which way it had gone. Nothing. When it was there, I tried to read the license plate through the curtain gap, but it was either filthy or covered with something. The only thing I ever saw clearly was a faded sticker on the back window from a local sports club. That tiny detail made it feel less like some random stranger passing through, and more like someone who actually belonged in the city with me. By August, I was wrecked from staying up so late. I told myself I just had to make it to the end of my lease, then I could go back to my parents' house and forget about it. When I finally moved home, it did stop. No strange cars outside their place. No 2:15 wake-ups except when I snapped awake out of habit. After a couple of quiet weeks, I let myself believe it had been some weird coincidence tied to that street, and I felt stupid for how obsessed I'd been. The following summer, June 2020, I moved back into the same apartment because it was cheap, and I already knew the landlord. I told myself I was being paranoid about the whole thing. 3 nights after I moved in, I stayed up late unpacking and watching videos. My phone lit up on the mattress. 2:15 a.m. A second later, I heard tires ease to a stop under my window, in the exact same spot. My heart dropped. Almost a year had passed, but the angle of the engine noise, the way it idled, everything felt identical. I stayed completely still on the bed, barely breathing. The car didn't leave after 5 minutes this time. It stayed. 10 minutes. 15. The engine idled softly, then cut. I still didn't look. When it finally started again and drove off, I realized my hand was locked around my phone so hard my fingers hurt. Over the next week, the pattern came back, but worse. The sedan started staying out there 15 to 20 minutes at a time. I avoided the window. One night I got angry at myself for just lying there scared and decided I needed to see what they were doing. I crawled along the floor to the curtain and lifted it just enough. The sedan was there, parked exactly where it always parked. The driver's window was rolled partway down. I could see a dark outline in the seat. Their arms came up and they lifted something long and narrow to their face, either binoculars or a camera, pointed directly at my window. I dropped to the floor so fast I banged my elbow. My hands were shaking while I dialed 911. I whispered that someone kept coming every night to sit outside and watch my apartment, and that they were there right then. The dispatcher asked if they'd tried to come to my door, if I recognized the car, if I had a plate. I kept saying no, just that it was always 2:15. She said a patrol car would swing by. By the time the officers rolled down my street, about 40 minutes later, the sedan was gone. One of the officers took my statement in the doorway. He glanced at the street and said that without a plate or a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested installing a camera, keeping my doors locked, and switching up my routines. The next day I bought thick curtains and hung them over the blinds, turning my room into a dim box. I moved my desk away from the window and made myself stay away from that side of the room at night. But even with everything covered, I could still hear it. Just after 2, the quiet outside would break with the slow pull-up, the idle, sometimes the engine cutting off completely while it sat there. I lay stiff in bed, counting minutes and trying not to picture a lens pointed straight through the wall. On some nights, under the low hum of the engine, I heard careful steps on the strip of gravel right under my window, moving back and forth, and I was too scared to look. Summer 2021. I moved to a different apartment on the 3rd floor, convinced that would finally be the end of it. I kept telling myself there was no way someone sitting in a car on the street could really get to me from that high up. I picked that place on purpose because it faced a courtyard and a small parking lot. For the first week, nothing strange happened, and I actually started to relax. I slept before midnight, answered my mom honestly when she asked if the car thing was still going on, and said no. Then 1 week after moving in, I woke up on my own around 2:10. No alarm, just that tight feeling again. I went to the bathroom, and on the way back I looked through the blinds toward the parking lot across from my new building. The clock on my nightstand flipped to 2:15 a.m. as my eyes adjusted. In the middle row sat a dark sedan I knew too well. Pointed at my building, I could see a driver inside. Still, head tilted slightly up toward my floor. I stood there with my fingers dug into the blinds, and it hit me that this wasn't about that old street at all. Whoever this was had found my new address somehow. After that night, I stopped pretending it was random. I barely slept, kept pepper spray and a kitchen knife on the table by my bed, phone charged, shoes by the door. A few days later, I told my neighbor across the hall, a grad student named Erin. I told her everything. From the first summer to seeing the car again in this lot, I tried to make it sound half like a joke, but she went serious and said if I saw it again, I should text her. The next time the sedan showed up at 2:15, I messaged her, and she walked straight out onto her balcony. The second she stepped into view, the brake lights came on, and the car pulled away. After that, we tried to get proof. On a few nights, she stayed out with her phone ready, aiming at the rear of the car while I watched from my room. Every picture of the plate came out too dark or shaky to read. After a while, the driver started backing into the space. After about a month of on and off visits, the sedan just stopped coming. It never showed up again. It was like it had vanished out of my life overnight. 4 years have passed since that summer, and I still have no idea who was in that car. I graduated, moved again, started working, and most days I can go a while without thinking about it. But at the end of summer 2021, right after the visit stopped, I saw a news article about one of my professors being in a bad car accident. The photos showed his vehicle, a dark sedan of the same model, with that same sports club sticker on the back window. I stared at those pictures way longer than made sense, zooming in like some hidden detail would jump out and confirm everything he recovered but never came back to the university. Somebody said he moved out of state. Maybe it is all coincidence. Still, whenever I see a dark sedan parked too long on my street, I check every lock and stay awake until it leaves, because living with that question in my head feels safer than ever knowing for sure. Most nights I do not sleep well. I've been working night shifts at a warehouse for 8 years, and I thought I knew every sound this building made. That Wednesday around midnight, I was on the first floor checking a pallet of returns when I heard footsteps right above me on the second floor. Clear, steady steps, not pipes or the freight elevator, moving across the concrete over Section B. No one was scheduled upstairs. I was the only one with keys. I set the scanner down and just listened for a second, hoping it was some weird echo. It wasn't. Heel, toe, heel, toe. Then a faint squeak, like wet soles on smooth floor. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the stairwell, already running through possibilities in my head. Cleaning crew. We didn't have one at night. A tech from the alarm company. No appointment. Or the thing I didn't like thinking about at all. Somebody who'd come in off the street. Cold air rolled down the stairwell when I opened the door. I went up, stepped out onto the second floor landing, and hit the lights for Section B. That's when I saw the tracks. Dark, wet shoe prints starting at the fire escape door and leading into the aisles. None going back. The door was supposed to be locked and alarmed. I'd personally checked it at the start of my shift. The water hadn't even started to dry. Whoever it was had stepped in from the fog maybe 15 or 20 minutes earlier. I followed the line of prints toward the back corner where we kept old wooden crates full of archived paperwork. I turned the last aisle and saw him. A guy in his 20s sitting on the floor between crates, back against the wall. Blue work jacket soaked, jeans muddy, torn sneakers, staring straight at me and not moving. I'm the night manager for Riverside Distribution's book warehouse just outside Portland. By that point, I'd been doing the same graveyard shift for 8 years. 10 at night to 6 in the morning, checking invoices, sorting returns, staging orders for the drivers who roll in before dawn. The money is decent for overnight work, and I like working alone. Mark Taylor, the owner, trusts me with everything. Keys, alarm codes, the safe combination. Nights, it's just me in that old 3-story building. The place used to be a textile factory. First floor is receiving and shipping, forklifts and dock doors. Second floor is bulk storage and returns. Third floor is mostly empty offices nobody wants to pay to heat. On Tuesday, October 23rd, right before I clocked out, Mark told me we were finally doing a full heating overhaul. 2 weeks, he said. They'd shut the whole warehouse down for 10 days, paid vacation for me, but he needed all the returns processed and the dead stock cleaned out before the contractors started tearing into ceilings and pipes. So Wednesday night, I came in ready to grind through as much as I could. Outside, the industrial park was buried in fog. I could only see a few car lengths ahead driving in inside. The building was dead quiet. I did my normal walk, checked every dock door, confirmed the side exits and the fire escape were latched, armed the office alarm. Nothing looked off. By 10, I was at the computer and receiving, scanning barcodes on stacks of bookstore returns, moving Reebok's titles onto fresh pallets. It was routine enough that my brain went half on autopilot. Around midnight, I needed to go upstairs for a list of damaged titles that had to be written off and tossed before the renovation. I grabbed my clipboard, headed for the stairs, and that's when I heard the footsteps over Section B again, faint through the ceiling. Hearing them lined up exactly with where I knew that fire escape was sent a jolt through me. I went up, keyed the lights on for Section B, and saw the wet tracks on the concrete, clearer now that I was expecting them. They led straight from the fire escape door deeper into the rows and just stopped partway down an aisle. No return trail, no random puddles, just that clean line of prints. I stood there with my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over 911, thinking it through. If this was a burglary, it was a stupid way to do it. We didn't keep cash upstairs, and there were way easier buildings in the park. The more likely answer was somebody from the homeless camp we'd had cleared out 2 blocks over, looking for a dry corner and some warmth. Calling the cops first and finding a guy just trying to sleep didn't sit right with me. On the other hand, following a stranger alone through dark rows of shelving wasn't exactly in the job description I compromised with myself. Keep the phone unlocked in my back pocket, stay near clear paths, and if anything felt wrong, back off and make the call. That didn't feel brave, just practical. I followed the prints slowly, stopping at each cross aisle to listen. Nothing. The air felt colder near the outer wall, like the fire door hadn't sealed when it shut. The tracks turned into the far corner of Section B, where we stacked those old wooden crates full of archived invoices and contracts. The rows narrowed there into a sort of dead end. I rounded the metal shelf at the end of the aisle and stepped into the gap between the crates and the wall. He was right there on the floor, exactly where the prints ended. Legs stretched out, back pressed flat to the concrete wall, shoulders hunched like he'd slid down and just stayed there. The blue work jacket was soaked through, jeans streaked with mud, sneakers ripped open at the toes. His face was thin and unshaven, hair matted from moisture, dark circles under his eyes. He stared straight at me, not moving, not even blinking, just sitting and breathing, vapor from his mouth visible. I stepped back, instinctively grabbed the edge of the shelf, didn't know what to do. The guy pushed himself up the wall slowly, never breaking eye contact, his hands shaking a little from the cold or something else. Every part of me wanted to get out of that aisle, but I also didn't want to turn my back on him. I told him as firmly as I could that he shouldn't be there, that this was private property, and I was calling security. For a second, he just stood there, chest moving fast, eyes fixed on my face like he was trying to decide something. He opened his mouth like he wanted to explain, but only a rough, broken sound came out. He winced, swallowed, and then finally whispered one word: "Sorry." It didn't sound angry or sarcastic. It sounded like he was apologizing to himself as much as to me. That somehow made me even more tense, because he didn't look dangerous. He just looked empty. Before I could say anything else, he turned and ran down the aisle toward the fire escape. I stepped aside so he wouldn't have to pass close to me. His wet shoes slapped the concrete, and a second later, the metal bar on the door slammed down and the fire exit banged open. The clang rang through the floor. Then I heard his boots on the outside stairs, fast at first, and then fading until there was nothing. I stayed where I was for a minute, breathing hard, hands still on the shelf, trying to get my head around what had just happened. Chasing him down those stairs alone made no sense, so when my legs stopped shaking, I walked to the fire door instead. I pushed it open a little and saw cold fog rolling up the outside steps and hanging there. The lock plate on the frame was bent, screws pulled halfway out, like someone had forced it earlier and then just pulled the door shut to hide it. The alarm contact was split, but that line only armed after closing, so no siren had gone off. Day shift had missed it, and he had used that gap to come in out of the weather. I closed the door, slid the inside chain across, and dragged a loaded pallet over so the frame could not be pulled open again. Then I headed downstairs to the shipping desk and grabbed my phone. I called Mark at home and told him someone had forced the fire exit, come inside, and then run when I confronted him. As soon as I said broken lock, he woke up fully. He said he was on his way and told me to stay on the first floor and not go wandering around upstairs by myself. While I waited, I kept the main lights on, stayed near the front doors where I could see the lot, and watched both stairwell doors in case the guy somehow came back in. Mark came about half an hour later with 2 guards from a security company he used for big loads. We walked all 3 floors with flashlights, checked between pallets and in the empty offices, and only found damp footprints and the bent fire door Mark called an emergency locksmith, had the lock swapped and an inside deadbolt added, and said there was no point calling police since nothing was taken, and I hadn't been hurt. I stayed there 3 more years, always double-checking that door, and that horse sorry, and his face in the crates never left me. I only remember fragments of that night, but my sister and friends filled in the gaps later at the hospital. They also reminded me I was 30, not some reckless teenager, which made everything feel even more pathetic. This was 2 years ago in Portland, where I'd flown for a college friend's bachelorette weekend. The others were buzzing about weddings, babies, joint accounts. I had just ended a 7-year relationship, and every toast about forever felt like a joke aimed at me. I kept thinking about the empty apartment I'd be going back to when the flights were over. We started with dinner at one of those loud, trendy places my friend had booked. Big plates, tiny portions, expensive drinks. I smiled, clinked glasses, laughed when I was supposed to while they argued about which bar crawl route would be most iconic. Someone joked that maybe I'd bring my ex as a +1 if you two magically fix it by next year. I laughed too hard and felt my throat tighten. The room suddenly felt airless. I muttered something about needing fresh air and slipped outside, already thinking about the quiet bar I'd noticed down the street. The bar was tucked between a tattoo shop and a smoke place, narrow doorway, no line. Inside it was half empty, a game on the TV. I slid onto a stool and ordered 2 double whiskeys with Coke, told the bartender to put them on 1 tab. I wasn't trying to get destroyed. I just wanted my brain quiet. He was middle-aged and friendly, asking where I was visiting from, joking about the rain. By the time he called last round, I'd finished both, and felt that loose warmth that usually tells me to switch to water. When he mentioned another bar a block away that stayed open until 3, I decided one more drink sounded better than going back to my hotel alone. The second place was darker and louder, the kind of bar where people lean into your ear to talk. I remember squeezing through a crowd to the counter and, without thinking, ordering 2 more double whiskeys with Coke. I don't remember if I even tasted them. After that, things stopped lining up. What I have are flashes. Being outside, leaning against a brick wall, a cigarette between my fingers, squinting at my phone, trying to text my sister. I'm fine, just needed some air. While my thumbs kept hitting the wrong letters until the words turned to nonsense, deleting, starting over, then nothing. The next fragment is hands under my elbows pulling me up, my feet dragging. Then the chill of a car seat under me, a door slamming somewhere. Men's voices raised in an argument I couldn't follow, like shouting underwater, and then it disappears again. My sister and friends filled in the rest. When I stopped answering texts, she said, at first she figured my phone died or I'd wandered back to the group. But when the bride said I still hadn't shown, my sister opened the location app. My dot was behind the second bar, in the alley. They walked over, half joking they'd find me crying on a curb. Instead, they found my phone in a dumpster, screen cracked, still buzzing with missed calls. That was when she said the panic really hit. They split up and started searching nearby blocks, calling my name, until one of them heard screaming from a parking lot behind the next building and pulled my sister that way. My sister reached the lot first. She saw a van with the side door open and my legs hanging out while some guy shoved my upper body inside, trying to slam the door. She started screaming at him to let me go. He turned and insisted I was his girlfriend, just drunk, that he was taking me home. She didn't argue. She stepped back, called 911, and kept repeating the address while he held me with one arm and used his body and the door to block any chance of pulling me out. Knowing all this later, I still hate how close I came to just vanishing completely. Hearing a siren in the distance, he suddenly shoved me out of the van, and I hit the asphalt so hard the air went out of me. My sister later said my body folded weird, and then just dropped. He jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and tore out of the lot. He was going so fast the passenger door flew open and smashed into some metal post near the exit. She tried to grab a picture with her phone, but all she got was a dark blur and an open door before he vanished around the corner. I don't remember any of that. For me, it's still just black. My sister said she ran straight to me, and for a second she thought I was dead because I wasn't moving right. She kept saying my name and I kept trying to answer, but it came out as these random sounds. The others were yelling into the phone at the dispatcher, explaining that the guy had tried to force me into his van and that he'd just sped off. Someone from an apartment nearby brought out a hoodie and slid it under my head so I wasn't grinding my face on the ground. My sister said my eyes would open a crack and then roll back again, like I was about to pass out every few seconds. By the time the ambulance pulled in, she was crying and shaking so hard she could barely explain what happened. The EMTs took over fast. They cut my jeans at the knees to look at the damage, checked my pulse, shined a light in my eyes, started an IV right there on the ground. She heard one of them say something about my blood alcohol level and how they needed to move quick. She told me that was the moment she realized it wasn't just about the stranger or the van. It was also about how far I'd pushed my own body. I woke up in the hospital the next morning, strapped loosely to the bed so I wouldn't rip anything out if I thrashed. There was an IV in my arm and something under my nose, and I had no idea why my legs hurt. For a second I thought I was waking up from a normal night of drinking, and then the room sharpened and everything felt wrong. A nurse noticed I was awake, came over, and in this calm, straightforward tone told me I'd been brought in with severe alcohol poisoning, unconscious, and they'd watched my breathing all night. When I looked down at my arms, the bruises were already showing. big dark shapes around my elbows and wrists where his hands had been. Both knees were bandaged, same with one elbow, the skin under them raw from where I'd hit the ground. The nurse told me I was lucky I hadn't cracked my skull, that if I'd landed just a little different, they'd be talking about a brain injury. She said the police had already been by once, but they'd come back when I could answer questions without drifting off. The detective who showed up later was kind, but blunt. He asked me to walk him through the whole night. I did my best, but every time we got to the alley and the van, there was just nothing. No face, no voice, no license plate, not even a clear color for the vehicle. Just the feeling of hands under my arms and the sense of being moved. He told me they'd pulled the security footage from the parking lot. There was a camera, but the angle was too high, the lighting was bad, and my body blocked the plate in the key moments. They could see a man dragging me, see my sister running in, see the door blow open and hit the post, but the numbers on the plate were just a blur. They logged it as an attempted abduction, took photos of my injuries, took my statement, and that was it. No arrest. No name. I spent the following months in therapy, working on the alcohol dependence and the depression, and trying to carry the fact that my own choices helped set all of this up. I cut drinking completely at first, because even the idea of being tipsy felt like playing with fire. My therapist and I went over that night again and again, but not in a dramatic way. More like, why did I keep ordering doubles when I already felt gone? Why did I peel off alone instead of just saying I was struggling? Why did I think numbing out was safer than sitting with the breakup? My sister came with me a couple of times, and it was rough hearing how scared she still was, how she blamed herself for not noticing I'd left the restaurant sooner. The guilt didn't magically fade, it just changed shape. I know something much worse could have happened, and I am honestly grateful to still be here, and to have a sister who refused to believe some stranger over her own instincts. But the awareness of how close I came to disappearing still sits in the back of my mind. The fact that I can't remember the pieces that matter, can't give a useful description, can't identify the man who tried to take me, sticks to me, and I catch myself watching random vans on the road and wondering if he's done the same thing to someone else, before or after that night. I was working at Panera Bread on Thunderbird Road last July, 24 years old. Just finished web design courses and looking for full-time work in my field. I was on the opening shift, 7 to 3, $11 an hour plus tips. Mornings were always the same. Lights on at 6:45, coffee brewers going, bagels sliced, doors open at 7. Our crew was small and predictable. Sarah, our 38-year-old manager with 3 kids, ran the front and drive-through. Ashley handled bakery, Javier ran the grill, and I bounced between register and bar. Most customers were office people or retired couples. We had regulars you could set a watch by. The one I noticed most was a veteran named Frank McKenzie, gray hair, cane, faded Marines cap. Every weekday he shuffled up around 7:40, ordered black coffee and a cheese bagel, then took his spot by the window with the Arizona Republic, "Morning, Frank." "Morning, kid." That was it, day after day. It sounds dumb, but that kind of boring routine made the place feel safe. Sarah always said, "If anything crazy ever happens in here, I'll be between you and it." I believed her. The worst I expected was complaints. She showed up near the end of August. First time I saw her, she blended in with the business crowd. Tall, maybe 45, dyed blonde hair perfectly styled, dark suit, heavy gold earrings. She ordered a medium almond milk latte and a chicken salad, smiled, paid, and took the corner table with a MacBook. 2 days later, she came back at 8 on the dot. Same order, same table, same polite smile. By Friday, she had been there every weekday, always facing the register. Second week, she started with small talk. How's your morning? Then she asked my name and school. After a few days, the questions got more personal. She wanted to know where I studied, what I did outside of work, whether I had time for hobbies or just people. I kept my answers short, blamed the line, and moved customers along. But I noticed she never asked Sarah or Javier anything. She remembered when I had 2 days off in a row and joked that she missed her favorite barista. One morning after the woman left, Sarah came over holding a rag and said, "You sure you don't know her? She watches you a lot." I said no. Third week, it stopped feeling harmless. She came in without her laptop, waited until the line was empty, then leaned on the counter. "Hey," she said, "could I get your number? My company wants catering, and I'd rather work directly with you." I kept my customer voice. "We have to book through the store," I said, and slid her the flyer with the office number. Her smile stayed, but her eyes went cold. "I'd feel better with you." "I trust you," she said. I repeated that I couldn't give out my cell. She stared, then left with an untouched salad. The next day, she didn't come in, and I thought it was over until I checked my phone and saw a Facebook request with her picture. My profile was private, but my name and Panera Bread badge had been enough I deleted it. 2 days later, Instagram pinged with a message from her. This long paragraph about how interesting and mature I seemed, and how she wanted to know the real me outside work. I blocked her and tried to forget it. 3 mornings after that, she walked in at 8. No laptop, just a stack of screenshots from Instagram she spread out across the counter. Looking back now, that moment is where my brain finally caught up with what was happening. Until she started lining up those screenshots, I kept telling myself she was just an awkward regular with bad boundaries. Seeing my face in captions and friends' usernames spread across the counter in our quiet little breakfast place felt like someone had dragged my private life onto a witness stand. I remember my hands going numb on the register keys and realizing she knew exactly who I was, while I still barely knew her name. In that second, the cafe stopped feeling safe anymore. "Why are you blocking me? I just want to be friends." "Is that so bad?" she said, loud enough that the couple at the next table stopped chewing. The screenshots were fanned out between us on the counter. My posts, my friends, my face. My brain kind of stalled. I managed, "Ma'am, you can't do this here." But my voice came out thin, and she actually stepped closer instead of backing off. I did the only thing that made sense. I called for Sarah. I didn't yell, just turned and said, "Hey, Sarah, can you come here a second?" Sarah walked over, wiped her hands on her apron, took one look at the pages, then at my face. Her whole expression changed. She squared up to the woman and said, calm but firm, "You need to leave him alone and leave the store, okay?" The woman ignored her and stared at me, demanding that I explain why I was being so rude when she was just trying to be friendly. Sarah didn't argue. She moved a little in front of me and said, "I'm the manager. I'm asking you to leave now. If you don't, I'll call the police." That finally got a reaction. The woman's jaw tightened. She grabbed the printouts with quick, jerky movements, crumpling a few, and backed toward the door while still ranting that I would regret treating her this way. Then she yanked it open and stormed out. The place went quiet in that weird way where everybody is pretending not to stare. Sarah asked if I wanted to take a break. I told her no, mostly because I didn't want to step outside alone. About an hour later, I was restocking cups when I saw the white BMW again, creeping along the curb. She was in the driver's seat, leaning forward, looking through the windows, but she didn't come in. Frank was at his window table like always. I saw him follow the car with his eyes. After a minute, he pushed his chair back and walked up to me. "She here for you?" he asked. I said yeah, and gave him a quick rundown. She kept showing up, found my accounts, wouldn't take no for an answer. He listened without interrupting, then just nodded once and headed straight for the door. I kept pretending to wipe down the front while I watched through the glass. Frank walked up to her window and leaned down. I couldn't hear anything over the espresso machine, just saw him talking low, then his hand cutting the air in a sharp motion while he pointed back at the store. Her face went from angry to unsure fast. 30 seconds later, she slammed the BMW into gear and sped off. When Frank came back in, he didn't make a big deal out of it. He just said, "She's not coming back." I explained it to her the military way, and sat back down with his paper. And for 3 days, it really did look like he'd scared her off. No BMW. No messages. Just normal mornings again. I let myself believe it was done. On the 4th morning, I pulled into the lot and saw the BMW parked across the street, facing our doors. She had sunglasses on and both hands on the wheel. She never came in. She just sat there. Every time I walked past the window, my stomach tightened. By noon, she was still there. By 3, my shift was over, and I was supposed to walk around back to my car, and there was no way I was doing that. I ordered an Uber to the front instead. When it pulled up, I clocked out, told Sarah I was fine, and walked straight from the register into the car without looking across the street. As soon as my door closed, I heard the BMW engine start and saw it slide in behind us in the mirror. The driver, a middle-aged guy named Raul, noticed it too. After a minute, he said, "Is that car following us?" I hesitated and then told him the truth. A woman from the cafe had been bothering me, and now she was tailing us. He muttered something under his breath and said he used to drive taxis for 20 years. Then he took a hard right down a side street, another turn through a neighborhood, then another. The BMW tried to follow but got stuck at a light. 2 more turns, and she was gone from the mirror. Raul didn't take me home. He pulled up in front of a police station in Scottsdale and said, "You need to report this man. Don't walk around by yourself until you do." I thanked him, got out, and went straight inside. At the front desk, I said, "I think I have a stalker." They sat me with a detective. I gave him her description, the license plate Raul had read out loud, the screenshots, the story about her following us from Panera. He listened, took notes, and said it clearly counted as stalking and harassment. A few days later, he called back and told me they'd identified her. Linda Harrison, 48, divorced, real estate agent. They served her with a restraining order saying she couldn't contact me or go near my job. For a while, it went quiet. I kept my accounts locked, changed my routes, tried to focus on finding a real web job instead of tracking every white SUV that passed the windows. Then one night I got a follow request from a brand new Instagram profile with a random name and no posts. But the picture was a cropped screenshot of one of my old stories. I didn't accept it. A few minutes later, a message came through anyway, full of the same stuff she'd written before about how I was special and we were supposed to know each other. I took screenshots and emailed everything to the detective, then went back down to the station in the morning and filed another report, realizing this wasn't going to be one of those problems that just fades away if you ignore it. So, when I was between my sophomore and junior year of college, I desperately needed money for tuition. I was broke in a way that made me check my bank app 3 times a day. Doing the same math and getting the same bad answer, I started answering every sketchy job listing I could find, and that's how I ended up in this old roadside motel on the edge of town. 2 floors, outside doors, faded sign, maybe 30 rooms. The owner, Barbara, was around 60. Short, tired eyes, but straightforward. She said she needed someone for 2 months to clean rooms after checkout, mostly daytime, paid in cash, No paperwork, no uniform, no dealing with guests. For a broke 20-year-old, that sounded like winning the lottery. The work was simple and boring, which I liked. I'd show up early afternoon with my cleaning cart, go room to room after people checked out, strip the beds, vacuum, scrub the tub, empty the trash. I almost never saw anyone except Barbara, who sat in the office with this little TV and a stack of crossword books. She kept saying the same thing every few days, like a rule she was reminding herself of as much as me. We don't do funny business here. Day shift only, no riffraff. I'd only been there about 2 weeks, long enough that the rooms all blurred together and I stopped feeling weird about being alone in them. That morning, she gave me the keys for 3 rooms on the 2nd floor. She told me all the guests in that block had checked out before 7 and the rooms were clear. "You'll have that end to yourself," she added. And I remember thinking that was nice. Fewer people to bump into. I left, ran some errands, then came back around 2. I parked by the side stairs, hauled the cart up, and the hallway was empty, like she'd said all the doors were shut. Blinds drawn, the only noise the ice machine humming at the far end. I started with the first room on my list, then the second. Both were total routine. Damp towels on the floor, half-empty soda bottles, TV still on the menu screen. 20 minutes each, and I was done. The third room was at the very end of the corridor, room 23. I remember thinking if I finished it fast, I'd get home early enough to work on a paper. I put the key in, pushed the door with my shoulder, and rolled the cart in. The first thing that hit me was this stale, heavy smell. Not trash, not sewage, just old. Like the room had been shut up for weeks, even though someone had supposedly slept there last night. The curtains were fully closed, so it was pretty dark for midday. I flipped the light on, and the overhead bulb buzzed to life. Same layout as every other room. 1 bed, little table, old TV, door to the bathroom on the right. I cracked the window to air it out and started on the bed. By then, I could do it on autopilot. Pillows in the laundry bag, yank the top sheet, roll everything into a twist so nothing brushed my clothes. I was halfway through stuffing the bundle into the bag when I heard something from the bathroom. At first, I thought it was the air unit rattling, but when I stopped moving, I could hear it clearly. A slow, irregular drip, like a faucet not fully turned off. That kind of thing annoyed Barbara, and I didn't feel like getting chewed out over a leaky tap. The bathroom door was open a few inches, just enough that I could see part of the sink, and a slice of the mirror. I walked over with the sheets still in my hands, and nudged the door with my elbow. I stepped into the bathroom and hit the light switch without really looking up. The fluorescent tube snapped on with that harsh white glare. The sink was right in front of me, mirror above it. And in that mirror, I could see the shower area behind my left shoulder. The curtain was one of those cloudy white plastic ones you can half see through. Behind it, there was a shape. Not a towel, not a pile of clothes. It was the outline of a person. I could make out shoulders, a head, the thickness of someone's torso. Whoever it was had to be standing in the tub, inches behind that thin curtain, completely still. For maybe 2 seconds, I didn't move at all. My brain did this weird thing where it tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a mop, or some folded blankets, or I was just tired. But the longer I stared at that reflection, the less room there was for excuses. It wasn't flickering or shifting like a shadow. It was just there, solid, human, not breathing loud enough for me to hear. I didn't turn around, I don't know why, but the idea of actually facing whoever was behind me felt worse than anything. I just started backing out, one slow step at a time, never taking my eyes off the mirror until the door frame blocked my view. Then I pulled the bathroom door shut, as quietly as I could, and only after it clicked closed did I feel my hands start to shake. I fumbled my phone out of my pocket and called Barbara. She answered on the second ring, sounding bored, and I just blurted it out. "There's somebody in room 23, in the shower. They're just standing there." My voice came out higher than normal, and I could hear how scared I sounded. She went silent for a couple of seconds, then said that was impossible. The guy from that room had checked out at 7, and the maids at night hadn't reported anything. She asked if I was sure, if maybe it was a reflection or a shadow, and I told her no. I knew what I'd seen, that there was a person behind the curtain, and they hadn't said a word. Her tone changed immediately. She told me to get out of the room right now, lock the door, and call the police from the hallway. She said she was leaving the office and driving over, walking to the door. I kept waiting to hear the bathroom door open behind me, or footsteps, or anything. I moved steady, but not fast, because part of me thought if I ran, it would trigger something, like I'd set off a chase in some stupid horror movie. It hit me how sure I'd been that nothing bad could happen in the middle of the day, in a half-empty motel where I thought I was the only one up there. My heart was pounding so hard it made my chest feel tight, but I didn't look back, didn't check the mirror again, didn't do anything except aim for the exit. I pulled the door open, stepped out into the hallway, and locked it behind me. I went down to the office, still shaking, didn't see Barbara anywhere, so I used my phone to call 911, told the dispatcher I was the cleaner, gave the address, and explained there was someone hiding in a motel bathroom who wasn't supposed to be there when I went upstairs. The dispatcher asked if they had threatened me, if I was still in the room, told me to wait somewhere safe, so I went outside to the parking lot, stood by my car, stared up at the window of room 23, and saw the curtains twitch once from inside slowly. By the time the patrol car pulled in, with 2 officers climbing out, my jaw was tight and my phone still in my hand. And a minute later, Barbara, parked crooked by the office, hurried over, and I told all 3 of them exactly what I had seen upstairs earlier. The officers asked if I could have mixed up the room number or seen my own reflection, but I shook my head, pointed at 23, and Barbara gave them the key, so they told us to wait downstairs while they checked, then came back saying the room was completely empty. Barbara frowned, said she wanted to see for herself, so we all went back up. One officer flipped on the bathroom light and yanked the curtain to show an empty tub, and then Barbara pointed at a single fresh, wet shoe print on the tile near it in that room. She told them the guest from that room had checked out right after sunrise, and the night maid had already cleaned that bathroom yesterday, so there was no way the footprint was old, and I saw the officers trade a look and stop treating me like I was imagining things. Barbara took them around to the side of the building to a metal service door by the back stairs, pushed it, and it swung open because the deadbolt wasn't set, so the officers said someone could have slipped in there, checked the perimeter, found nothing, and wrote up a report. Back inside, one officer told Barbara to call again if anything else happened, and told me not to confront anyone myself, and then Barbara apologized for the whole thing, said to skip the rest of my rooms, paid me cash for the day, and told me to go home early. I grabbed my stuff off the cart, shoved everything into my backpack, headed out to the lot, hit the unlock button, and halfway to my car, I glanced toward the thin line of trees behind the building and saw a man in dark clothes standing there watching the second floor. I froze there in the open, thinking about yelling for Barbara or waving at the officers near their car, but I looked toward them for a second, turned my head back, and the man was gone. So I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away from there. I didn't sleep much that night, kept seeing the shape behind the curtain whenever I closed my eyes. And the next morning, I called Barbara, thanked her for the work, told her I couldn't keep cleaning there anymore, and she sounded disappointed, but said she understood and wished me luck. Even now, years later, I still catch myself checking the bathroom mirror to see the shower behind me before I step in, because I keep thinking about that silent person standing there in that motel, and how close I was to pulling the curtain back and finding out what happened. So, when I was 26, my boss organized this team-building trip to an abandoned camp in the Cascades. There were 8 of us from the office, all in our 20s and 30s, pretending it was about bonding when everyone really just wanted a long weekend away from Portland. The place was an old summer camp that hadn't been used in about 5 years. The owner was some distant relative of my boss who agreed to let us stay if we brought our own gear and didn't complain about the state of the place. When we pulled in, the camp looked rough, but not unsafe. Paint was peeling, some windows were boarded, the roofs were green with moss, but the buildings stood straight. Mike, my boss, pointed out the big mess hall that still had partial power and said that would be the shared kitchen and hangout spot. My coworker Emily and I claimed what used to be the admin cabin because it had real bunk beds and a door that latched the others split between 2 larger cabins closer to the gravel lot. The first few hours were boring in that normal way. We hauled in coolers, argued about where to plug in the one working power strip, boiled pasta in the mess hall, and drank cheap wine out of old enamel mugs someone found in a cupboard. People talked about clients, deadlines, who was about to quit. It felt like the same office conversations, just with trees instead of cubicles. By 10 or 11, people were yawning. Someone mentioned a campfire, but everybody was already halfway to bed. Emily and I walked back to our cabin, changed into sweats, and she opened another bottle for just us. Around midnight, we decided to sit on the porch, finish the last glasses, and talk without everyone else around. The camp was quiet except for a fridge humming in the mess hall and some insect noise out in the trees. We were in the middle of complaining about Mike's management style when it hit. Both of us stopped talking at the same time. We smelled it together. It was this sharp chemical stink, like paint thinner mixed with ammonia, rolling in from the forest in waves. One breath was normal air. The next felt like it was scraping my sinuses. My eyes started watering and there was a sour taste in my mouth. Emily pulled her sweatshirt over her nose and said, "That's not normal, right?" I shook my head and already felt a little nauseous. We didn't stay to investigate. We went straight inside, shut the door, cranked the windows closed, and shoved a towel along the bottom of the frame. The smell still leaked in, but it was bearable. Lying in our bunks, we threw out theories to make it less scary. Emily said maybe there was an old dump nearby, or someone burning trash down the road. I said maybe some kind of small industrial site. The drive-in had passed a lot of nothing, so it was possible. Neither of us mentioned anything criminal. Eventually, the sting faded, and we drifted into that light, twitchy kind of sleep you get in a new place. I woke up to flickering light sliding across the wall. For a second, I thought it was car headlights, but there was no engine sound, and the pattern was wrong. It was pulsing, not steady. Emily whispered, "Are you awake? Do you see that?" I rolled out of the lower bunk and moved to the window. I opened one slat of the shutter with my fingers. Out past the last cabin and the old fence, in the trees, I saw at least 4 separate moving lights. They weren't moving in a straight line like hikers on a trail. They bunched together, then spread apart, stopped, swung back and forth. It looked more like people searching for something. Emily grabbed her phone and checked it even though we already knew there was no signal. "Nothing," she muttered, like maybe it would have changed in the night. The nearest cell tower was something like 12 miles away. Mike had made a whole speech about digital detox on the drive up. Then we heard the voices, men, more than 2, yelling short phrases back and forth. The tone was hard and impatient, not relaxed. We couldn't make out the words, just rough male shouting under the trees. Emily wanted to go wake the others, but I stopped her. If these guys were drunk hunters or something worse, the last thing I wanted was 8 panicked office workers flipping on lights and stumbling around outside. "If they don't know we're here, let's keep it that way," I whispered. It felt cold to say, but it also felt practical. We stayed crouched by the window, breathing quietly, watching the lights work their way along the camp boundary for what felt like forever, sweeping past the fence line and skirting the open clearing but never cutting in toward the cabins. Every now and then one beam tilted up, and I'd jerk back, sure they'd seen us, but nothing happened. I checked my watch once. It had been about 40 minutes since I first woke up. Somewhere in there the chemical smell came back, way stronger than before, hitting us even with the windows closed. My eyes started burning again, and Emily kept rubbing at her throat. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the smell cut off. One by one, the lights turned away and moved deeper into the forest until they were gone. We didn't sleep after that. We stayed up until the sky went gray, trading off who watched the window and who sat on the bottom bunk trying not to spiral. Neither of us wanted to be asleep if those guys came back. Only when we heard doors opening from the other cabins and someone laughing near the mess hall did we finally step outside over breakfast. We told everyone what had happened. The others just looked at us, confused. Nobody else had heard the shouting or seen lights. Their cabins were farther from the tree line and they'd all slept hard after the long day. One guy joked we'd gotten into the wine too hard. Mike didn't laugh. He listened, asked a couple of practical questions, then said, "Sounds like a meth cook." He'd served in the military before the corporate job, and said the smell matched what he'd run into on drug busts during joint operations. The room went quiet after that. Nobody tried to argue when he suggested we leave that afternoon instead of staying the full 2 nights. We all started packing without much discussion. I could feel people glancing toward the trees more often. Emily and I went back to our cabin to grab the last of our stuff and check around outside so we didn't leave anything behind. I was rolling up a tarp when she called my name. Sharper than usual, I walked around the side of the cabin and saw her staring at the ground by the wall. Lying in the flattened grass were 3 empty acetone canisters and a scrap of filthy cloth stiff with pale, warped stains that looked exactly like chemical burns. Mike didn't waste time when we got back to the city. As soon as we unloaded the vans at the office, he went inside, closed his door, and called the sheriff's office for the county where the camp was. Later, he told us he described the location, the chemical smell, the shouting, the lights, and the acetone canisters, and the cloth we'd found. The dispatcher sounded interested, but not surprised. Like this wasn't the first time someone had called about something like that. A week later, he forwarded an email to all of us from a deputy. They said they had sent a couple of units and someone from the drug task force to check the camp and the woods around it. According to the report, they didn't find any active setup, no fresh trash, no new tire tracks. Just some old disturbed dirt near a logging road and a few burned spots that could have been anything. Reading that message made my stomach twist. I knew what Emily and I had seen and smelled. Having a neat, nothing to see here summary made it feel like we had exaggerated it or dreamed it. Even though we remembered the same details, I called Emily that night after work. She answered with, "You saw the email, right?" Before I even said hello. We ended up going back over everything like we were checking each other for mistakes. What time we had gone to bed, when the smell started, how the lights moved, where the canisters were lying, how close they had been to our cabin. Every time we tried to poke a hole in it, the story still lined up the same. 2 people don't hallucinate the exact same burned cloth in the exact same place. A few days after that, Mike stopped me near the break room. He said he'd talked again to his relative who owned the camp. This time the guy was more honest. He admitted that forest rangers had found pieces of underground labs in that area a few years earlier. Not right on camp land, but close enough collapsed tunnels, old containers, plastic tubing, burned pits. All the stuff you see in photos when a drug bust makes the news. They had figured whoever ran it had moved on, so nobody thought to warn us about it before we went up there. Hearing that did not calm me down. It did the opposite. It meant what we had walked into wasn't some weird one-off thing. That forest already had a record of people cooking chemicals and not caring who got hurt. After that talk, I stopped even pretending I was open to camping trips. Friends asked me to come along to normal campgrounds with kids and RVs and all of that, and I always had some excuse I didn't tell most people what had happened, because it sounded dramatic when I tried to say it out loud. But every time I caught a strong chemical smell, even just cleaning spray in a restroom or nail polish remover at a salon, my brain jumped straight back to that porch and the burning in my nose while those lights slid between the trees. The thing that still bothers me most is how coordinated it was. Those lights moved like they were sweeping a path, not wandering. The chemical smell hitting us right before we saw them felt deliberate, like they were testing a batch with no signal and men yelling in the dark. Staying quiet was the choice, and I check that county's news, but nothing shows up. When I was 22, I moved into this old duplex in Tacoma, where I had the first floor, and a guy named Brad lived upstairs on the second. It wasn't anything special. Old carpet, weird smell, thin walls, but it was cheap and close to a bus line. Brad and I met the first day, both of us wrestling ugly furniture through the same crooked doorway, trying not to drop anything. He cracked a joke about living the dream, and by the end of the week we were sitting on my floor eating ramen and comparing rejection emails. We were both fresh out of college and broke in that specific way where you're still pretending it's temporary. We'd send out resumes, refresh our inboxes, and talk like this was just a phase before real life started. Brad seemed like a normal dude. Smart, dry sense of humor, a little reserved but not weird. He'd come downstairs most nights to play video games, or just sit at my tiny kitchen table and talk about what he'd do once he finally got a job. The one thing that stood out, even early on, was that he never invited me upstairs. Not once. Anytime I joked about checking out the upstairs suite, he'd brush it off. I remember one night my TV started flickering and I said, "We should just use your setup. I'm pretty sure your place isn't cursed." He gave this tight little smile and said, "Yeah, it's a mess up there, man." Then immediately changed the subject. I figured he was either a hoarder or embarrassed, so I let it go. The first time it really bothered me was after a big storm when water started dripping through the ceiling above my couch. I went upstairs and knocked, told him there was a leak, and maybe there was a busted pipe in his bathroom or something. He opened the door only a crack, like 6 inches. As soon as I mentioned the water, his whole posture changed. He said, way too fast, "Yeah, I'll check it out later, don't worry about it." I said, "I can come up and help." And he almost cut me off. "Nah, it's fine. I got it." Door stayed mostly closed. The way he looked past me toward the stairs like he was afraid someone might see us talking stuck in my head. After about 3 months, little stuff turned into patterns I couldn't ignore. Brad started showing up with bruises. At first, it was one on his forearm that he said came from eating shit on a run. A week later, there was another higher up, yellowing around the edges. Then one near his collarbone. Same general areas, over and over. He shrugged them off, said he was clumsy, but he'd jump when a door slammed or when someone shouted outside, flinch so hard he'd spill whatever he was holding. At night, I'd hear arguments through the ceiling. At first, I told myself it was the TV, but it wasn't. There was a woman's voice, sharp and relentless, and Brad's voice low and apologizing. Sometimes it was just tense talking, sometimes full-on screaming. A few times I heard something break and the sound of furniture dragging. I'd stand in my kitchen staring up at the ceiling, phone in my hand, not sure if I should do anything or if I was just being nosy. One evening we were out on the front steps with cheap beers, watching cars roll by. Brad was quieter than usual, arms folded tight like he was trying to hold himself together. Out of nowhere, he said, "You've probably figured out I don't live up there alone." Then he told me about Miranda. They'd been together 2 years. She was 4 years older, a manager at some company downtown, and the one paying most of the bills while he job hunted. He said that at first she'd been supportive, pushing him to send applications, editing his resume. Then slowly it turned into her reminding him that everything they had was because of her. She held all the passwords, paid all the rent, checked his bank balance, checked his location. If he stopped at the store, she wanted the receipt. If he was gone longer than he said, she wanted to know why. "She just likes things a certain way," he said, but his voice dropped when he added, "especially when she drinks." He told me that the last few months, yelling had turned into hitting. First shoves, then slaps when she decided he was talking back, then punches to his arm and ribs when he blocked the doorway or tried to keep her from throwing stuff. He rolled up his sleeve and showed me this dark, finger-shaped bruise on his bicep. "She grabbed me when I tried to leave in the middle of a fight," he said. "Didn't even realize how hard until the next day." I asked why he didn't leave, and he laid it out very calmly, like it was a math problem he'd done 100 times. No job, no savings, no family nearby, and his name technically on the lease with hers. If he walked out, he had nowhere to go. If he pushed back and she called the cops first, he was done. "Nobody's going to look at her and think she's the problem," he said. I didn't have an answer for that. It was the first time I'd heard a guy talk like that about his girlfriend, and I honestly didn't know what to say without sounding useless. The breaking point, at least for me, came on a Thursday when he had a job interview at this small startup. He came down to show me his outfit like a kid on the first day of school, smoothing his one decent shirt over and asking if it looked okay. "If I get this," he said, "I can start saving, maybe get a room somewhere, ease things up." He was nervous, but hopeful. I told him he'd do fine and watched him walk to the bus stop. That night, around 8 or 9, the yelling started upstairs. It was louder than usual, Miranda's voice ragged and slurring, words like failure and embarrassment punching through the floorboards. Something glass shattered, hard enough that I heard it over my TV. Then a thud shook the ceiling. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, phone in my hand, trying to decide if calling the cops would make it worse for him. Before I did anything, it went quiet. No footsteps, no more yelling. Just silence. About an hour later, Brad knocked on my door. He was holding his side like every breath hurt, his lips split, dried blood on his chin. He told me the company called that afternoon and said they'd gone with someone more experienced. When he told Miranda, she was already drunk from a bad day at work. She threw a bottle at him, called him useless, then came at him swinging when he tried to walk away to the bedroom. "She just kept hitting," he said, not really looking at me. I told him he needed to call the police, that what she was doing was abuse, that it didn't matter that she was a woman. I said he could crash on my couch, that we'd figure something out in the morning, look at shelters, call hotlines, anything. He just shook his head like the decision was already made. He said if he called, she'd start crying, say he attacked her, point at his size and her job title, and by the time it got to a report, everyone would see a drunk but respectable manager and a broke guy with no job, and they'd believe her story over his, and that possibility scared him enough that he stayed. We ended up calling my older sister because she's a social worker and actually knows this stuff instead of just guessing like I was doing. I stepped into the hallway while Brad sat hunched on my couch, pressing a bag of frozen vegetables against his ribs. I laid everything out to her, probably talking too fast, and she was quiet for a moment before saying what I already kind of knew. Unless Brad made a report himself, or there was something happening right then, the police weren't going to swoop in and fix it. She said if I called for him without his consent, it could backfire, especially if Miranda claimed we were harassing her, I went back in and put my sister on speaker. She talked to Brad directly, asked simple questions, kept her voice steady. She told him plainly that what he was dealing with was domestic violence, that it didn't matter that Miranda was a woman, or that he hadn't hit her back. She said there were hotlines for male victims, and sometimes shelters that could help men too. We agreed he'd stay on my couch that night, and in the morning we'd start calling around and see what real options he had. For the first time all night he looked a little less stiff, like the idea of a plan took some of the weight off. Around midnight after my sister hung up, we turned the TV on low just for noise. Brad's phone lit up on the table. Miranda. First text was, "Where are you?" Then more, one after another. She called him a coward, said he'd embarrassed her, said she knew he was downstairs talking shit about her. Then she switched to apologizing, saying she just had a rough day, that she loved him, that they could fix it if he stopped making her look like the villain. Then it turned again. If he didn't come back upstairs, she was calling the cops and telling them he attacked her and ran. Brad stared at the screen for a long time. His shoulders kind of collapsed. He said if he didn't go up, she'd do it, and tomorrow would be worse. I told him he didn't have to go anywhere, that we could shut his phone off and deal with whatever came next when we had a hotline worker or lawyer on the phone. He shook his head and said, "You don't get it. They'll believe her. She'll cry. She always cries." He was tired and hurting and scared, and in his head going back up there seemed like the only way to keep it from blowing up even bigger. When he stood up, I moved in front of the door and told him, "Please don't go." It wasn't dramatic. I just didn't want to watch him walk back into it. He thanked me for letting him stay, said he'd come back down if it got bad again, and stepped around me. I didn't grab him. I didn't call the cops while he was on the stairs. I told myself he was an adult, and that pushing too hard might make things worse if Miranda ever decided to spin a story about me too. After he left, I lay on the couch fully dressed, staring at the ceiling and listening. At first, it was just muffled voices. Then, sometime around 3 in the morning, it turned into full-on shouting again. Miranda's voice was sharp even through the floor, Brad's lower and strained. Something slammed hard, then another heavy impact that I assumed was a door. Then nothing. Not footsteps, not movement, nothing at all. The silence dragged on until I felt sick. I was still arguing with myself about going up there when blue and red light flashed across my walls. Sirens stopped right in front of the building. Car doors, fast boots on the stairs, radio chatter. I went to the window and watched officers run up toward Brad's place, while I just stood there with my heart hammering and no idea what I was supposed to do. What I know now is from what detectives told me, what I read later, and a bit from Brad's own words. When he went back upstairs, Miranda started in again, accusing him of telling people their business and making her look crazy. She'd kept drinking after he left. At some point, the fight moved into the kitchen. She grabbed a knife off the counter and came at him, wild, actually cutting his arm. He grabbed for her wrists and they struggled, both of them slipping on something on the floor. He managed to get the knife out of her hand. When she reached for it again, he shoved her away from him, just trying to get space. She stumbled backward, hit the edge of the table with the back of her head, and went down. According to the report, she lost consciousness immediately. He tried to wake her up, saw the blood, and called 911 himself. By the time paramedics got there, she was already dead from the head injury. The 2 bangs I'd heard were the table and her body hitting the floor. I watched from my window as they brought her down on a stretcher under a sheet and walked Brad out in handcuffs. His face was blank. No yelling, no crying, just gone. The investigation dragged on for months. I gave statements about the bruises and the fights and how scared he'd been to call the cops. They pulled their messages, talked to people who knew them, and slowly built a picture that matched what I'd seen. In the end, they decided not to charge him, ruling it self-defense. On paper, he was free. But when he finally came back to grab his things, he wasn't the same guy I'd met carrying a couch up those stairs. He jumped at sounds, didn't joke anymore, moved like everything hurt. He stayed a little while longer, then told me he was leaving the state to stay with a cousin, said maybe distance would help. We traded numbers but never really talked again. Sometimes I still lie awake replaying that night, thinking about every point where I could have called someone or pushed harder, and I have to live with knowing that whatever I did or didn't do, we both still walked away from that place carrying something we can't put down. It happened last summer when me and 3 friends rented a cottage by a lake in Michigan for a long weekend to celebrate Jade turning 30. I was 29 then, the only one still stuck in what I kept calling my pre-30s crisis, and the trip felt like a break from thinking about it. The other 2 were Melissa and Hannah. All of us had known each other since college, so the drive up on Friday was just 4 hours of trash music and gossip. The cottage was old but comfortable. Single story, with a wide porch and a little path down to the water. The owner, Glenn, managed a bunch of places remotely from another state. He'd sent us this long email with check-in instructions, house rules, emergency numbers, all that, and left the key in a lockbox on the front steps. His welcome message mentioned the neighboring cottage was empty all season, so we basically had the little cove to ourselves. We unpacked fast, threw our bags in whatever rooms we grabbed first, opened champagne, and started chopping vegetables for tacos. That first night was easy and calm. We ate out on the porch, phones face down in a pile, and just sat there until late talking about work, relationships, and the dumb stuff we used to do in the dorms. Nothing felt weird or off. It honestly just felt like we were getting a short reset from real life. Saturday morning around 9, Melissa realized her wireless earbuds were gone. She came out of her room holding the charging case open and empty, already annoyed. She swore she'd left them on her nightstand before going to sleep. We went back with her and checked under the bed, inside the sheets, inside her duffel, even under the dresser in case they'd rolled. Nothing. Then we searched the living room, the kitchen, the porch, the bathroom. Jade asked if she maybe left them in the car. We checked there too. Melissa kept saying she must have done something stupid with them after she got tipsy, but she looked genuinely confused, the way you look when your brain is trying to pull up a memory that just isn't there. We eventually gave up and left the room a mess, telling her they'd probably turn up. The afternoon we spent in the little town nearby, grocery store, liquor store, coffee, an hour at the public beach. It was busy, normal, families everywhere. When we got back to the cottage around 6, Hannah stopped halfway through the kitchen and said, "Did one of you leave this open?" The door that led from the kitchen to the backyard was cracked, maybe 3 inches. All of us remembered closing it and locking it before leaving that morning. For a second, nobody moved. Then Jade checked the lock and said the latch felt loose. Maybe it didn't catch and the wind pushed it. We walked through every room, looked at the windows, checked the front door bolt, opened the closets, more to calm ourselves than because we expected to find someone. Nothing looked touched. I texted Glenn to ask if any maintenance person could have come by. The message sent, but no answer. We locked the kitchen door carefully, tested it twice, and tried to shake it off. The rest of Saturday was fine. We cooked pasta, opened another bottle, played card games at the table, and went to bed around midnight. Sunday morning, Hannah's phone charger had vanished. She walked into the kitchen holding her phone and the empty end of the extension cord where she swore it had been plugged in. She said she'd left the charger in the living room outlet overnight while she scrolled TikTok on the couch, then gone to bed. Now it was just gone. That was when the mood shifted for real. Melissa laughed and said maybe one of us was sleepwalking and collecting electronics, but nobody really reacted. Hannah snapped that it wasn't funny and said, "Things don't just disappear." We went through the same motions, checked cushions, under furniture, looked in bedrooms, even inside the kitchen drawers in case somebody absent-mindedly tossed it somewhere. Nothing. All of us kept saying out loud that there had to be a boring explanation, but we kept glancing at each other like we were waiting for somebody to admit to a prank that never came. Around lunchtime, Jade said we should at least look at the neighboring cottage, just to rule out the idea that someone might be staying there without Glenn saying anything. From the road, it looked abandoned, shutters closed, no car in the driveway, grass a little overgrown. We walked over together, staying close. The front door was shut and locked. We circled the place, checked the back deck, peered through a narrow gap in one of the shutters. Inside looked empty, just bare furniture outlines in the dim light. Nothing like someone had been living there recently. No footprints, no cigarette butts, no random trash that would have made it feel like a hangout spot. On the way back to our cottage, we talked ourselves back down again. Maybe Melissa had her earbuds at home. Maybe Hannah had packed the charger and just didn't remember. Maybe we were tired and a little too keyed up from city life. That evening we did a barbecue on the porch. It was colder than the first night, so we stayed wrapped in hoodies, huddled close to the grill and the little portable speaker Jade brought. We drank more than we'd planned to, half because it was our last full night, and half because all the weird missing stuff talk had us tense and we wanted to loosen up. Hannah got the drunkest. She started putting on old songs from college and dancing on the deck boards, almost tripping over the cooler. At one point, she announced she was going to jump in the lake and started tugging off her jeans, already barefoot. Jade told her no way. It was dark, and we had no idea how deep it got right off the dock. I added that we were all at least mildly drunk, and none of us were strong swimmers. If she slipped or cramped up, nobody was going to be any real help. Melissa backed us up, saying she wasn't about to explain to Hannah's parents how she'd drowned on a girls' trip. Hannah argued for a minute, then gave up and flopped dramatically onto the living room couch, still mumbling about how we were boring. Around midnight, she passed out there, one arm over her face, shoes on, half a blanket slipping off her. The three of us picked up the worst of the mess, rinsed dishes, and sat around another hour talking lower, the way you do when you're tired but not quite ready for bed. Eventually, we turned off the lights and went to our rooms, leaving Hannah snoring on the couch. I remember thinking Hannah was going to have a terrible hangover Monday morning. I woke up to noise in the kitchen and figured Hannah was banging around making coffee. But when I came out, it was Jade pacing back and forth. She looked off, like she'd seen something bad. She was holding her charger cord with no phone attached and said, "Okay, this isn't funny. My phone's gone." She said it again, slower, like saying it twice might make it not true. She was sure she'd plugged it in on her nightstand before bed, same as every night. We went straight to her room. The cable and brick were in the outlet, but the spot where her phone normally sat was just empty. We pulled the drawer all the way out, checked the floor, under the bed, in her suitcase. Nothing. This wasn't a random charger or earbuds anymore. This was her whole phone, and we were supposed to leave after lunch. We searched the whole cottage again, this time more frantic. Melissa checked the bathroom and kitchen, opened every cabinet, even looked in the fridge like maybe one of us had done something stupid while drunk. I called Jade's number from my phone while we looked. It went straight to voicemail, no ring, like it was off. Jade kept saying her battery had been fine before bed. Melissa suggested maybe it glitched and died overnight, but that didn't explain why it wasn't physically anywhere. Hannah sat on the arm of the couch and said maybe she'd messed with it while she was drunk, because she vaguely remembered talking to Jade at some point, but she couldn't remember details. That turned into the first real argument of the trip. Melissa asked her, point blank, to be honest, if she'd taken it or moved it, because we just needed to know where to look. Hannah snapped back that she didn't remember going in Jade's room at all, then immediately said she also barely remembered anything after 10. We went through her stuff anyway, with her there. Dug through her backpack, checked her purse, popped the trunk, and went through bags and blankets, reached under the seats, checked the couch cushions again. No phone, no cracked case, no screen, nothing. It felt like it had just evaporated. Jade sat down at the small kitchen table with my phone, logging into her email and banking apps to check for weird sign-ins or charges. After a few minutes, she put my phone down and said, "I'm calling the police. I don't care if they think this is dumb." At that point, it didn't sound dumb to me at all. She called the local non-emergency line and explained everything. The missing earbuds, the charger, now her phone, the kitchen door that had been open, the owner being out of state. The dispatcher sounded polite but tired, said they could send someone out, but it mostly sounded like misplaced property. About an hour later, a county officer pulled up by himself. He walked through the cottage with us, asked when we'd last seen the phone, if anyone knew we were staying there, if any of us had noticed strange cars or people around. He checked the door frame and said there were no signs of forced entry. He took Jade's information, wrote a quick report, gave her a case number for insurance, and told us most of the time things like this turned up in luggage or behind furniture after people got home and unpacked. He didn't outright say we were overreacting, but you could hear in his voice he thought the drinking and stress were a big part of it. After he left, it was close to noon. Checkout was at 1, so we packed in a weird, quiet rush, checking every pocket 3 times before loading the cars. We left that afternoon just feeling drained and tense. Nobody really talked the first hour of the drive back. It felt like we were leaving something active behind us, not a normal vacation spot. Glenn still hadn't replied to my original message about anyone coming by. 2 days later, when we were all home again, Jade forwarded an email from him. He apologized for answering late and said he'd been traveling internationally with bad service. He said nobody should have entered the cottage and suggested we triple-check corners and gaps where small items fall. Jade wrote back and asked him to please search the place himself when he got back. About a week later, he emailed again saying he'd gone through the cottage top to bottom. Under furniture, behind nightstands, in vents, around the porch, all of it. He said he didn't find a phone or anything else that looked like ours. That same day, Melissa sent a picture in our group chat. It was her earbuds sitting on the floor of her car under the passenger seat. She'd found them jammed under there when she moved the seat forward for a vacuum. Her text said, "So I'm an idiot, apparently." We all joked about it, but it didn't really cancel the feeling from that weekend. A few days later, Hannah sent a selfie holding up her charger with this annoyed face. She'd found it in a side pocket of her backpack while finally unpacking the last of her stuff. She admitted she must have shoved it in there half asleep or drunk and forgotten. Jade's phone never showed up. We kept bringing it up in the weeks after, usually late at night in the group chat. Melissa is convinced Hannah grabbed the phone while wasted, wandered outside with it, and dropped it in the lake or tossed it in the trash, then blacked it out. Hannah swears she doesn't remember ever touching it and says she'd know if she lost a whole phone, not just a charger. I honestly still don't know what to think. When I look back on that trip now, I don't really remember the lake or the games or the porch talks first. I remember Jade staring at that empty spot on the nightstand and the way all of us kept looking at each other, each of us wondering if the real problem was someone creeping around that cottage or one of us sitting right there in the same room. I used to work as a dispatcher for a tow truck service on night shifts. The work was basic: answer calls, fill out tickets, send trucks, ask where they were and what happened. By 3 in the morning, it was usually just me, one other dispatcher, and a pot of cold coffee. That night in early March was almost too quiet, actually. The rain earlier had given us a handful of calls, then nothing. Tony sat a few desks over with one earbud in, scrolling through videos. I stared at the clock, fighting sleep. When the phone finally rang, the sound felt loud enough to shake me awake. I put on my headset, hit the button, and gave the standard greeting I expected some drunk guy in a parking lot. Instead, I heard a woman. Her voice was low and a little breathy, like she was talking close to the mic. She said her car had broken down on Highway 45 and she needed a tow. She sounded calm, not angry or panicked. I opened a new ticket and asked her name, car model, exact location, callback number. She said her name was Christina, that she was driving from Austin when the engine died. She gave me a mile marker and mentioned a closed gas station she'd just passed. I typed everything in and read it back to her. I told her one of our drivers would be there within 40 minutes. She thanked me in a quiet voice, but didn't disconnect. There was a pause. Instead of a click, I heard her breathing on the line. I waited a couple of seconds, then asked if she had any other questions about the tow. "You have a nice voice. What's your name?" she asked. That stopped me for a moment. I hesitated, then told her my name was Alex. "Alex," she repeated slowly. "I like that name. Do you work there every night?" It sounded casual, but it hit wrong. I kept my tone neutral and said I worked Monday through Friday, midnight to 8. "Must be lonely working nights," she said after a few seconds. Her voice had a smile in it now. "I'd like to keep you company sometime." My grip tightened around the pen. She wasn't saying anything I could complain about, but it felt off. I tried to steer us back to normal and reminded her the driver was already on the way. She gave a laugh. "You sound tired, Alex. I'm picturing you with coffee, half asleep in that office." I told her I did drink too much coffee and said I needed to keep the line free, so I'd have to end the call. She laughed quietly again. "Of course, Alex. Thanks for the help. Maybe we'll meet in person sometime?" I muttered something vague like, "Yeah, maybe," and disconnected before she could say anything else. I pulled the headset down around my neck and rubbed my eyes. Tony rolled over in his chair and asked who I'd been talking to. I told him it was some woman on Highway 45 who'd been complimenting my voice. I mentioned how she'd asked about my schedule and joked about keeping me company. He smirked, called her my fan, and said there were always weird ones on night shift. I still pulled up her ticket and checked the address and number again. Everything matched. About half an hour later, our driver Carlos radioed in from Highway 45. He sounded tired. He said he'd reached the mile marker and there was no broken down car. He'd driven up and down the shoulder, checked near the closed gas station she'd mentioned, and pulled into the lot to look around. No hazards, no car, nobody at the roadside. He added that he'd called the client several times and each time it went to voicemail after a couple of rings. Sitting there with the radio in my hand, I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I told Carlos to hold for a second, spun my chair back to the monitor, opened Christina's order, and checked the system line by line. The order was placed. All the data was still there. Strange, but sometimes people change their minds or fix the issue before we arrive. So I closed the order and pushed it out of my head. The shift ended quietly. I didn't think about Christina again until the next night, right around the same time, when the phone rang and I heard that same breathy voice. She said, "Hi, Alex. It's Christina again. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. My friend helped me with the car before your driver arrived." I told her it was fine, no problem at all, and I was already reaching for the button to close the call when she kept going. "I enjoyed talking to you yesterday. Maybe you're free after your shift? We could meet, have coffee." Her tone wasn't flirty exactly. but it had that same slow, deliberate sound that made me tense up. I told her firmly I couldn't meet clients, said it was against company rules, which was true enough. She didn't respond right away. I could hear faint breathing again. Then she said, quieter than before, "Too bad. I thought we could get to know each other better, Alex. I'm sure we'll meet." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just ended the call and stared at my monitor until Tony swung his chair around and asked if it was the same woman. I nodded, and he made a face, but didn't joke about it this time. The third night she didn't call, and I tried to take that as a good sign. But on the fourth night, around 2 in the morning, the phone rang again. Tony grabbed it before I could, and I heard the tone in his voice shift as he listened. Then he looked at me over the top of his monitor. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough. Her asking, "Where's Alex?" "I want to talk to Alex." Tony told her I was on vacation and asked how he could help instead. She hung up without another word. He set the phone down slowly and said, "Yep, that's her." 10 minutes later it rang again. Tony answered it with this resigned sigh. This time she didn't ask anything except, "Tell Alex that Christina called. Tell him I'll be waiting for him. We'll definitely meet. Soon." Then she hung up again. Tony didn't even look at his screen for a minute. He just turned toward me and said, "Dude, this isn't funny anymore. This woman is clearly not normal." Hearing him say it out loud made everything click in a way it hadn't before. Up until then, I'd been trying to rationalize it as just a weird caller. But the insistence, the timing, the way she kept repeating my name, none of it felt harmless. When my shift ended, I went straight to management. I explained the calls, how she'd asked for me by name, how she kept pushing for a meeting. They didn't treat it like nothing. My supervisor told me to stop giving my name over the phone, to start using the dispatcher ID number instead, and to notify them immediately if she called again. They considered flagging her number, but since she hadn't threatened anyone, the most they could do was tell us to document any new incidents. But she never called again. Not once. The first week after reporting her, I jumped every time the phone rang. By the second week, I expected her voice every night. After a month, I thought maybe she'd gotten bored. Now it's been 3 months, and everything's normal on paper. But I still tense up whenever a woman calls in late at night and says my name like she already knows me. Last Thursday evening, my sister asked me to meet her at the mall to help pick out a birthday gift for my niece. I'm in my mid-40s, work as an accountant, and by the end of the week, my brain usually feels like overcooked pasta. But we hadn't seen each other properly in months, so I said yes. I left the office a little early, drove over, and got there around 7, parking on the second level of the underground garage like I always do, because there are usually plenty of open spots, and I don't have to wedge myself between giant trucks. I locked the car, checked that my work laptop was in the trunk, and went up the stairs into the mall. Inside, it felt like any normal weeknight. I walked past clothing stores, that noisy arcade full of teenagers, the usual stuff. I found my sister near the glass cases in the jewelry store, leaning over the counter talking to the salesgirl. We spent almost an hour in there choosing a bracelet for my niece, going back and forth over tiny details and whether paying extra for the charms made sense. It was nice just standing shoulder to shoulder, complaining about bosses and kids instead of me staring at spreadsheets and invoices. After we finally paid, we went to the small cafe across from the escalators. We ordered 2 coffees and 1 piece of cake to split that my sister immediately ate more than half of. We talked about her new job, about the guy in my department who keeps messing up purchase orders, about our parents getting older. For a while, it felt like we were back in our 20s, sitting in cheap cafes and talking about nothing important. Around 9, I noticed metal gates coming down over storefronts and people drifting toward the exits. We hugged, promised we'd do this again soon, and then went our separate ways. She headed for the main entrance, and I walked back through the mall the way I'd come, down the escalator and toward the stairwell to the garage, already thinking about getting home and going straight to bed. The second I pushed the heavy door into the garage, the noise from the mall cut off, and it was just the hum of the lights. The level was almost empty now, just a few cars scattered around. I could see my car right away. What I hadn't seen when I arrived was the white minivan now parked tight next to it, close enough that its sliding door lined up with my front seats. It struck me as a little odd, since there were plenty of empty spaces, but I told myself not to be dramatic. People park however they want. I walked over, unlocked my car, and opened the driver's door. I put my purse and the small bag with the bracelet on the passenger seat, and was turning to sit down when I heard the heavy slide of the minivan's side door opening behind me. The sound made me pause. I turned and saw a man climbing out from the back. Mid-40s maybe, medium build, jeans and a dark jacket, nothing that would stand out in daylight. He smiled quickly like he didn't want to scare me, and asked if I could help him for a second. He said his navigation was acting weird. His phone had just died, and he couldn't figure out how to get to the exit. I told him the exit was on the first level, that he just had to go down the ramp and follow the signs. While I was talking, he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell stale cigarette smoke on his jacket. He said the different levels confused him and asked if I could show him on his map in the car, and he gestured toward the open side door of the minivan. Something in the way he moved made me wary. He was standing just a little too close, angled so that he was between me and the driver's seat. To get in, I would have had to squeeze past him. My stomach tightened. I kept my voice sharp and said I was in a hurry and couldn't help, then tried to step around him to sit down. He shifted at the same time, one small step to the side that put him right back in my way, still smiling, but not actually letting me pass. It was a tiny thing, but it flipped a switch in my head from annoying stranger to this is not right. My heart started pounding. I told him again that I needed to go and that he should ask at the information desk upstairs. At the same time, I angled my body like I was going to head back toward the stairwell if he blocked me again. For a second, he just looked at me, the smile dropping, like he was deciding what to do next. Then his eyes shifted over my shoulder, and his whole expression changed. Without a word, he stepped back fast, walked around the rear of the minivan, and climbed into the driver's seat. I turned and saw a security guard from the mall walking toward us from the middle of the level, a flashlight in his hand and a radio on his chest. The guard was watching us. The man didn't hesitate. He started the engine, pulled out of the space a little too quickly, and drove down the ramp, the sound of his tires echoing in the garage. The guard reached my car just as the van disappeared from view and asked if everything was okay, because I, in his words, looked like I'd just been scared half to death. My hands were shaking so hard I fumbled my keys. I told him what had happened, how the man had come out of the van, asked me to come look at his map, and then kept stepping in front of me when I tried to get into my car. Saying it out loud made me realize how close I'd come to going along just to be polite. The guard listened, took out a small notebook and pen, asked me to go over the color of the van, any marks I noticed, the part of the license plate I'd seen, and what the man looked like, and he wrote down the description of the minivan and the man, and said he'd pass the information to the security office. He looked at me for a second after he finished writing, then offered to walk me to the exit in case that guy was waiting somewhere below. I didn't try to act tough. I just said yes. We went down the ramp together, him a little ahead with the flashlight, sweeping it between the parked cars as we passed. There was no sign of the white minivan on the first level. He stood next to my car while I got in, waited until I locked the doors, then stepped back and motioned for me to pull out. I drove slowly past him, and he stayed there, watching, until I turned onto the street. On the drive home, my mind kept replaying how close that man had stood and how normal he'd tried to seem. I realized I hadn't even yelled or told him off. I just tried to slip around him like it was some awkward social situation. At every red light, I checked the mirror, half expecting the minivan to appear behind me. Nothing happened, of course, but when I got home, I locked the door, checked it again a few minutes later, and left my keys right by the front entrance in case I needed to leave fast. The next day, after a short, broken night, I decided I couldn't just shrug and move on. From my desk at work, I called the mall's main line, asked for security, and told them my name. A man who introduced himself as the security manager came on and said he'd already heard about me from the guard. He told me they had pulled the camera footage from the garage and that the man in the white minivan had followed my car in from the entrance. He explained it step by step. The recording showed my car going up to the second level. Right after that, the minivan entered, paused for a moment, then followed at a distance. When I parked, he didn't pull in next to me. He parked several rows away, turned off his engine, and just sat there. Only after I walked into the mall did he start the van, move it, and line it up tight beside my driver's door. The manager said there was no doubt it was planned, and that they had already sent the recording to the police. Hearing it described like that made my stomach drop. In the garage, it had almost felt like a weird interaction that got interrupted. Listening to him, it turned into something else entirely. This wasn't a random man who happened to need directions. He had picked me before I even got out of my car. 2 days later, around lunchtime, a detective called my cell. He confirmed my name, referenced the mall, and asked if I could come in to give a formal statement. My boss didn't argue when I explained what it was about, so I left a little early and met the detective at the station. He took me to a small room, set up a monitor, and played parts of the garage footage. He froze the image on the driver's face and asked if I was sure it was the same man I'd talked to. I said yes. Then he told me the license plate on the minivan came back as stolen and that they hadn't found the vehicle itself yet. He said this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. About 3 weeks earlier, in a neighboring town, a woman had been lured into a minivan in a parking lot under almost the same pretext, helping with navigation, looking at a map on a phone. Once she got inside, they drove her to a wooded area, robbed her, and left her there. She survived and got help, but she was badly shaken and still dealing with it. Before I left, the detective told me to always park near exits or entrances where there are more people and cameras, and never walk over to a stranger's car just because they ask for help. Since then, I can't make myself park in underground garages at all. I'll choose an open lot and walk in the rain instead. My sister is more careful now too, texting me when she gets to her car in the evening. When I told this story at work, one coworker said a man in a van had tried to stop her at a different mall last year, but she felt something was wrong and ran back inside. I keep thinking about how easily I could have ignored my discomfort, stepped closer to that open door, and ended up as the woman in the detective's other story instead of the one who drove home. In August 2023, I moved to a new state after getting a position at a large hospital. I was 31, tired of roommates and short leases, and for the first time I had real money after selling my tiny studio back in my old city. The idea of renting again made me angry. I didn't want a mortgage either, so from the start, I was specifically looking for something cheap enough to pay in full, even if it meant older, smaller, not in the perfect location. Prices near the hospital were insane. One night in the break room, I was scrolling listings and swearing under my breath when a coworker from my unit, Mark, Said his neighbor was trying to sell half of a duplex fast residential street, family area, around a 30-minute drive from the hospital. He said the guy was divorcing, needed to split assets, wanted cash, and no drama. Then he told me the price, $95,000 for his half. I actually asked him what the catch was. Mark just shrugged and said, "Messy divorce. He wants it gone." I met the owner 2 days later. He introduced himself as Todd, maybe early 40s, normal looking, a little worn out. He walked me through the place. My half was a 2-bedroom with its own entrance, small living room, compact kitchen, shared wall with the neighbors. Nothing fancy, but it didn't feel gross. No strange smells, no obvious rot or leaks. If anything, it felt like something an older couple had kept clean and plain for years. While we walked, he kept bringing up the divorce. How they'd fought over money. How his ex wanted to drag things through court. How he just wanted to close this chapter and stay with family in another state. He said he'd rather drop the price than keep paying utilities and property tax on a place he didn't even live in anymore. It lined up in my head with what Mark had said. People do dumb financial things when they're hurt and tired. A too good price didn't feel impossible in that context. On the kitchen counter, he had a stack of documents already laid out, with stamped pages and signatures in blue ink. He pointed at lines where he said I'd sign, explaining each form in simple terms: purchase agreement, deed transfer, disclosure. It all looked professional enough that I didn't slow down and really read like I should have. I told myself realtors and lawyers were for people taking out big loans, not for a small cash deal like this. Todd seemed straightforward, and I was afraid if I hesitated, he'd find another buyer. We met at my bank, and I wrote him a check for the full amount. We both signed where the papers said to sign. He handed me a ring of keys, gave me my copies, and stuffed his into a folder. He thanked me, said this helped him more than I knew, and mentioned again he'd be driving out of state soon to stay with relatives. A week later, on my next stretch of days off, I moved in with a friend's help and a rented van. The first week was boring in a good way. I stacked boxes in the second bedroom, dragged my old furniture in, worked my shifts. I met the couple in the other half of the duplex, an elderly pair who gave their first names, shook my hand, and went back inside. They were polite but distant, the kind of people who wave from the driveway but don't invite you in. Nothing about any of it felt wrong. If anything, I was proud I'd managed to own something without a bank. About 10 days in, there was a knock on the door late morning. I opened it to the mailman holding a bundle of letters. He asked, "Do you know when the Robertsons are coming back?" I blinked at him and asked who that was. He tapped the mail with his finger and said the Robertsons were the family who'd lived in this half of the duplex for the last 5 years, that their mail was piling up and the vacation hold had expired. I told him I was the new owner and had just bought the place from Todd. His face changed. He frowned, looked past me inside for a second, then said quietly he'd look into it, and walked away with the letters still in his hand. The next afternoon, another knock. A woman in her 40s stood there, keys in her hand, and said she was the Robertsons' niece. She said they were on a long trip to visit their daughter in Canada for 3 months, and she was just stopping by to check on things. When I told her I'd bought the unit from Todd and lived there now, she stared at me like I just told her I'd moved into her car. She said, "No, that's their place," under her breath, then shook her head, muttered something I couldn't catch, and walked away fast down the path. As soon as I shut the door, I felt my chest start pounding. I pulled out the folder from the drawer by the fridge and flipped through the pages, suddenly seeing every line as if it might be fake. I called the local real estate registration office, told the woman who answered that I'd bought a duplex and wanted to confirm the ownership was updated. She told me I'd need to come in person with any documents I had and an ID. Her tone didn't change at all, which somehow made me more nervous. The next morning I drove to the office and sat in a plastic chair with the folder clamped in my hands. When the clerk called me up, I slid everything onto the counter. She asked for the address and lot number, typed it into her computer, then silently compared the screen to the paperwork. Her eyebrows pulled together. She checked again, then looked at me like she was measuring how much to say. "This duplex belongs to the Robertson family," she said. "They've owned it for 7 years. There have been no sales or transfers." I felt lightheaded. I pushed the purchase contract toward her, the one with Todd's signature and the notary seal at the bottom, and told her that was the agreement we'd signed. She studied it for a long moment, tracing the seal with her thumb, then finally shook her head. "This is a forgery," she said. "The seal and notary signature don't match any registered notary in our state. You've been scammed." I felt the ground go out from under me while I stood at that counter. I remember nodding like I understood what the clerk was saying, but I couldn't really hear her anymore. 95,000. I had taken years to save that. I had worked extra nights, picked up holiday shifts, skipped trips, all to not owe a bank. And I had handed every dollar to a man who never owned the place I was living in. When I walked back to my car, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. In the parking lot, I called Mark, the co-worker who'd first mentioned Todd. I told him everything the clerk said. At first he sounded shocked, then defensive. He kept repeating that Todd wasn't really his neighbor, more like a friend of a friend he'd seen around a few times. He said he honestly thought the deal was legit, and that Todd had told him he owned the property from before his marriage. When I asked if he had any other contact info, Mark hesitated and finally admitted he only had the same cell number I did. I hung up and tried calling straight to a recorded message saying the number was no longer in service. I sat there for about 20 minutes before I drove straight to the police station. I told the officer at the front desk I'd been the victim of real estate fraud, and they had me sit down with a detective. He listened, took notes, looked through the papers, and then he leveled with me in plain language. "Without a verified full name, a real address, or a clean money trail, this is going to be hard," he said. He asked how I'd paid. When I told him I'd written a personal check, not through escrow, not through any title company, and hadn't used a lawyer, he rubbed his forehead and sighed. He didn't blame me, but he also didn't sugarcoat anything. He explained they'd open a report, but tracking someone who used a fake identity, fake notary, and maybe a burner bank setup could take years or go nowhere. Then he said the part that really made me feel sick. "As of right now, on paper, you don't have any legal right to be in that duplex. Technically, you're occupying someone else's property without permission." I asked if I was going to get dragged out. He said it would depend on what the actual owners wanted when they came back, and that I should be prepared to leave quickly if they told me to go. Leaving wasn't simple. I had put everything into that check. I didn't have deposit money for a new place. I didn't have family nearby to stay with. Quitting my job and going back to my old state would have meant starting over again from zero. So I went back to the duplex and stayed. I started asking the elderly couple next door and a few people on the street if they had any way to reach the Robertsons, an email, social media, anything. Everyone just shrugged, said they mostly saw them outside with their dog, that they seemed nice but private. Those 2 weeks were the worst. Every knock on the door made my heart jump. I kept my things half-packed, boxes still open, like I might need to run in a hurry. I barely slept on my days off because I kept replaying every moment with Todd, trying to see what I'd missed. One evening, just before dark, I heard tires on the driveway. I looked through the front window and saw a car I didn't recognize pull right up. A man about late 50s climbed out, pulled a suitcase from the trunk, and unlocked the gate like he'd done it 1,000 times. That's when it finally sunk in that the Robertsons were home. I didn't wait for anyone to knock. That night I packed everything I could fit into my car, grabbed the rest in trash bags, and drove to the cheapest motel I could find near the hospital. The room was miserable, but at least no one could tell me I didn't belong there as long as I paid. Early the next morning, I drove back to the duplex one last time. I stayed on the sidewalk, wrote a note leaning on my steering wheel, and taped it to the front door. I explained the whole situation as simply as I could, apologized for being in their house, and wrote in big letters that I had been scammed and hadn't known it was theirs. At the bottom, I wrote my name and phone number in case they wanted to talk or needed anything from me. They never called. About a month later, I got a short letter from the police stating they were closing the case. They wrote that the person using the name Todd couldn't be located. The ID copy he'd shown my bank didn't match any real record, and the notary listed on the paperwork didn't exist in state records. In other words, there was nowhere else to go with it. $95,000 gone. Nothing to show for it except a file number in some system and a stack of worthless papers in my drawer. Right now, I rent a room from another nurse on my floor. Most of my pay goes into a new savings account, and the rest into rent and that motel bill. I don't look at Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, or any private sale group anymore. If it's not going through a legit agent or lawyer, I don't touch it. Sometimes, when I'm driving between shifts, I pass the street where that duplex is. I've seen the Robertsons out front once or twice, bringing in groceries, living their normal life. I don't know if they ever read my note or just tossed it without a second thought. What sticks with me most now is how ordinary it all looked at every step. A co-worker's recommendation, a tired man with a believable story, official-looking stamps, a price that felt lucky, but not impossible. I still scroll real estate sites sometimes, and every time I see a deal that looks a little too good, I catch myself checking the photos like I might see Todd in the background. I keep hoping I'll recognize his face or his fake name in some new listing and at least be able to warn somebody, but I haven't found anything yet. I was working as a freelance copywriter back then, and often traveled between cities for client meetings, preferring trains to planes because I could work during the journey. It was 4 years ago. I was 22, exhausted most of the time, but proud I could live off my laptop. I wasn't religious, but on long trips, I always listened to calm music or meditation podcasts. It was the only thing that stopped my brain from replaying every dumb sentence I'd said to clients. That evening, I was coming back from a meeting in a neighboring city with a small advertising agency that wanted a whole campaign done yesterday. The meeting had run long, lots of fake smiles, and "we'll be in touch." And by the time I got to the station, it was already dark. I checked the board, double-checked the platform like I always do, grabbed a coffee I didn't really need, and got on my usual evening train home, planning to spend the 3 hours finishing their draft so I could send it before I even got off inside. The car looked like it always did on a Tuesday night. Half empty, too bright, everyone minding their own business. A couple of teenagers sat near the far door sharing earbuds. An older guy in a suit was half asleep with his mouth slightly open. A woman with a big scarf scrolled on her phone. I picked a window seat in the middle of the car, where there were the fewest people, and put my backpack on the seat next to me until the train started moving, just in case a rush of last-minute passengers showed up. Once we pulled out and no one else came in, I slid my bag down, took out my laptop and charger, found the outlet with my foot, and put on my headphones. As the podcast started, and some calm man's voice talked about breathing and letting thoughts pass, my shoulders finally dropped a little. I opened the brief, answered a couple of client messages, then got into that focused zone where you're just moving words around and time goes by without you really noticing. About 40 minutes into the trip, I felt the table in front of me shift. That tiny movement you only get when someone sits down on the other side. I hadn't seen anyone walk past, so it pulled me out of my focus for a second. The car was still mostly empty. There were whole rows with no one in them. I glanced up, expecting someone to sit a few seats away, and instead saw a man about 50, lowering himself directly into the seat opposite mine. He wore a worn leather jacket and a dark knit hat pulled low on his forehead. Clean shaven, but with that permanent tired look some people have. He placed an old battered notebook on the table between us like it mattered. For a second it all felt normal. People can sit where they want. I don't own the table. I gave him the automatic small smile you give a stranger you're sharing space with and looked back at my screen. I tried to keep working, but after a minute I felt that someone is staring at you pressure. I pretended to scroll, then glanced up again. He wasn't looking at his notebook, or out the window, or at a phone. He was staring straight at my face, not in a distracted way. Just fixed. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, or pretend he'd been looking somewhere else. His expression didn't change at all. My stomach tightened. I paused the podcast but left the headphones on for a few seconds, suddenly very aware of how quiet our part of the car was. The teenagers were still at the far end. The suited man hadn't moved. The woman with the scarf was still staring at her screen. Nobody else seemed to notice anything. It was just me and this man and his stare. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I've met plenty of awkward people who never learned how to handle eye contact, and I didn't want to be dramatic over nothing. So I slipped the headphones down around my neck, tried to sound neutral, and said, "Excuse me, is everything okay?" It came out soft, polite, like I was offering help. He didn't respond. Not a word. He didn't even blink in a way I could register. Up close, his eyes looked flat, not angry or upset, just locked on me. We stayed like that for a few long seconds, me half turned toward him, laptop open, his notebook sitting untouched between us. That was enough for me. Nothing had technically happened, but my heart was beating too fast, and I knew if I forced myself to sit there, I'd just get more anxious. There were plenty of empty seats. I didn't owe this stranger my presence. I decided I'd move to the other end of the car or the next one and finish my work there. I closed my laptop, slid it into my backpack, wrapped the charger quickly, and started gathering my things. I tried to move in a calm, steady way, so it wouldn't look like I was panicking or inviting conversation. When everything was packed, I stood up, swung the backpack strap over my shoulder, and stepped into the aisle. His eyes followed me as I turned toward the door, but he still didn't say anything. I took a few steps, aiming for the connection to the next car where I knew there would probably be more people. I had just wrapped my hand around the metal handle when I heard his voice for the first time behind me. "You shouldn't leave," he said, low and hoarse, like the words were scraping out of his throat. "I have something to show you." Every muscle in my back tensed. I stopped, because of course I did, but I only turned enough to see him from the corner of my eye. The notebook was still on the table, closed. His hands rested on either side of it. He hadn't stood up. He just stared at me, waiting, like the next move was on me. I didn't ask what he wanted to show me. I didn't say anything at all. I gave a small nod, not agreeing, just acknowledging that I'd heard him, then turned back to the door and stepped through into the next car. He didn't follow me immediately. I could tell from the silence behind me and the lack of footsteps on the plates between the cars. In the next car, there were more passengers scattered along the rows, people talking quietly or staring at their phones. And I remember that strange mix of shaky relief and leftover fear as I walked all the way down the aisle and chose a seat as far from the connecting door as possible, sitting at the far end of the next car where several other passengers were seated. But about 15 minutes later, I saw the same figure in the leather jacket come in through the far door of my new car and start walking down the aisle toward me. He could have picked any empty row, but he kept moving in a straight line, eyes already fixed in my direction. I felt that same cold drop in my stomach and realized this wasn't some coincidence or awkward seating choice. I grabbed my backpack, stood up fast, and headed for the front where the conductor usually stood near the service compartment. I didn't look at the man as I passed him, but I saw in the corner of my eye that he slowed down, like he hadn't expected me to move. The conductor was right where I hoped he'd be, leaning near the little door to the staff area, checking tickets on his phone. I went straight up to him and said, probably too fast, that a man had been staring at me in the last car and had now followed me to this one. He didn't brush it off or tell me I was imagining things. He frowned, asked quietly, "Which one?" And I pointed back down the aisle. The man in the leather jacket was standing dead in the middle, not even pretending to look for a seat, just staring at us like he was waiting. The conductor told me to stay where I was, then walked over to him with that calm, firm body language people use when they deal with drunks or trouble. I couldn't hear them clearly, but I saw the conductor ask for his ticket and nod toward the other car, and after a short pause, the man slowly turned around and went back through the door without ever looking in my direction. When the conductor came back, he told me the guy claimed his seat was in the other car and that he told him to stay there. He looked me over once, checking if I was shaking or crying, then pointed to an empty spot a few rows from the service door. He said I could sit there for the rest of the ride and that he'd keep an eye on the aisle, and that if the man came back, he would deal with it. That sounded reasonable, so I thanked him, still embarrassed, but also weirdly relieved that someone else had seen enough to take it seriously. I sat in the new seat, put my backpack on the floor by my feet, opened my laptop again just to have something to stare at, and decided not to use my headphones anymore. The rest of that trip, he never came back into our car, but I kept checking the door every few minutes, my body tense, listening for footsteps in the aisle even when the conductor walked by. When the announcement finally said we were arriving at my stop, I packed up fast and stood near the door before the train had even slowed down. As soon as the doors opened, I thanked the conductor under my breath and stepped out into the flow of people on the platform. I tried to stay in the middle of the crowd, thinking he'd have a harder time walking straight up to me if he was still somewhere on the train. I glanced back and saw him through a window of another car, still in that jacket, staring at me as the train pulled away. And I never saw him again, but I wonder what was in Notebook and why he chose me. I'd never had any seriously frightening situations until that fall evening when I was 21. Now I'm 23, and I still replay that night way more than anything else from college. It was early October, a street food festival downtown, rows of tents and trucks closing off the main street. Me and my friends Jessica, Olivia, and Hannah, all around 20 to 22, had decided to go blow off steam after a brutal week of midterms. We were in that dumb, happy mood where your biggest worry is whether your eyeliner will last through greasy food and selfies. We zigzagged between trucks, splitting tacos and noodles, taking pictures under those cheap string lights while some cover band played way too loud at the end of the block. There were families with strollers, groups of students like us, older couples, cops walking around. The whole thing felt busy, but safe. Around 9, we stopped near the stage to listen for a bit, standing between a kettle corn stand and a craft beer tent, just yelling jokes at each other over the music. That's when I got that feeling. The very specific kind of being watched where your skin goes tight even though nothing around you actually changes. At first, I tried to shrug it off and kept talking, but I kept losing my train of thought and catching myself halfway through a sentence, turning my head to look behind us. There were just crowds, faces, phones, people holding paper plates. Nothing jumped out, but the feeling didn't ease up. I started doing these fake casual scans like I was hunting for another dessert stand, telling myself I was being dramatic. That's when I noticed him, a guy standing maybe 15 feet away on our right, alone, facing us instead of the stage. He had a dark hoodie and one of those sports masks covering the bottom half of his face, the kind people wear for allergies or a cold. Back then, I actually thought masks were kind of practical, so my first reaction wasn't fear. It was basically, okay, he's sick, standing off by himself, whatever. But he wasn't watching the band or scrolling his phone. His head was turned straight toward our little group and didn't move. The song ended. Someone bumped my shoulder. Jessica yelled something about finding dumplings, and we drifted away from the stage toward another row of tents. I didn't say anything then, because I didn't want to be the paranoid one who ruins the mood over a random guy in a mask. About 10 minutes later, we were at a different truck arguing churros versus fries when I did another casual sweep of the crowd. He was there again. Same hoodie, same mask. Now maybe 10 feet away, standing just outside the light from the truck, still not in any line, still alone, still angled at us. That was the moment my brain stopped with the "you're being dramatic" lectures and shifted into, okay, pay attention, this is weird. We stayed out another 30 minutes or so, wandering through the stalls, but I started quietly tracking him, checking reflections in truck windows, switching sides with Hannah so I could see better. Every time I looked, he was somewhere nearby, never closer than a few steps, never farther than the next group over. Eventually, we went into this covered seating area they'd put up, rows of plastic tables under a big canopy with one open side facing the street. We found a table, dropped our food, and sat there trying to talk over the noise while people squeezed past us looking for seats. When I glanced toward the entrance, he was just inside the opening, leaning against one of the poles like he belonged there, again empty-handed, again not talking to anyone. I still remember leaning toward Jessica and whispering, "That masked guy has been near us, and he never buys anything." She glanced back, went tight in the face, pulled out her phone, and told her boyfriend to meet us at the main exit because some creep kept staring. We stood, turned for the exit, and he turned too, walking parallel, keeping us in sight. Jessica called her boyfriend again, this time practically screaming into the phone, spelling out exactly where we were and telling him he needed to get to the lot right now. I could hear him through the tiny speaker, confused at first. Then his voice went sharp when he realized she was actually scared. He started asking questions, but she just kept saying, just come to the van now," and hung up before he could finish. All four of us shifted into that weird half-walk, half-run, trying not to look like we were freaking out, but definitely moving faster toward the exit that led to the parking lot. The crowd thinned a little near the edge of the festival. I was starting to think, okay, we just have to make it to the van, and then we're fine. Then I heard it. Fast footsteps behind us that didn't match the slow pace of everyone else. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the masked person speed up, weaving between groups, then going from a quick walk into a full run. They weren't heading toward a tent or the stage. They were running in a straight line that matched ours. Instead of coming straight up behind us, they cut off to the side, slipped around a couple with a stroller, and shot ahead. In seconds, they were in front of us, right in the middle of the path to the exit, just standing there. It was so obvious then. They knew we were trying to leave, and decided they weren't going to let that happen easily. Hannah grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. Olivia kept saying, "No, no, no," under her breath like a mantra. Jessica's breathing turned choppy and loud. She looked everywhere for a way around, but there were too many people and too little space. The masked person just stood in front of us like a wall. I don't know if it was adrenaline or just my personality, but something in me flipped from fear to anger. I stepped out in front of my friends so they were behind me and raised my voice over the music and chatter. "Hey!" I yelled. "Back off and leave us alone!" The person froze, then slowly turned their head fully toward me. They tilted it to the side like a dog hearing a strange sound, just staring. Their eyes locked on mine, calm and unblinking. like they genuinely didn't understand why I was shouting. No apology, no backing up, no attempt to explain. Just that steady stare. That killed any last hope that this was some weird misunderstanding. Out of nowhere, I remembered the pepper spray on my keychain, the one I'd bought after a campus safety talk, and then stopped thinking about. My fingers went straight to my pocket. They were shaking, but I still managed to dig out my keys and slide the spray into my hand so it was hidden in my fist. I brought my hand up where they could see it and flipped the little safety cap with my thumb. "I'm serious," I said, and my voice came out flatter than I expected. "If you don't leave us alone, I'll use this." For a second, nothing changed. They didn't step back or raise their hands or say anything. Then they took one clear step closer, closing the distance on purpose, like they were calling my bluff. That was enough for me. I lifted my hand, aimed for where their eyes were above the mask, and pressed down on the button. The spray shot out in a tight stream and hit right across the eye area and the top of the mask. They made this sharp, choked sound, and both hands flew to their face. They stumbled back, turning a little to the side, rubbing at their eyes and the mask. People nearby finally reacted, but mostly with annoyed or confused looks, like they thought it was some drunk fight we'd started for no reason. I didn't care what any of them thought. "Go!" I yelled at my friends. "Run!" We turned hard toward the side street and sprinted. The noise of the festival dropped behind us fast. The parking lot lights came into view, and I saw Jessica's boyfriend's car near our van, engine running, his door open like he'd been halfway out of it looking for us. The second he saw us running full speed, he threw himself back behind the wheel. We yanked doors open and basically shoved each other inside. I slammed mine and heard the others slam too. The locks clicked just as he dropped the car into gear and pulled out of the space without asking a single question. Out of instinct, I twisted around to look out the back window. The masked person was running toward us from the direction of the festival, one hand still up by their face. They reached the car just as we were rolling forward and grabbed for the rear door handle, yanking it hard, but it was locked. Jessica's boyfriend didn't slow down. He kept driving, and the person jogged alongside for a few more yards with their hand on the handle, then finally let go when the car picked up speed. I watched them shrink in the rear window, standing alone in the middle of the parking lot, both hands on their face, just watching us drive away. I never found out who that person was, or why they picked us. And in the weeks after, I went back and forth between telling myself I'd overreacted and replaying every second in my head. But a few months later, I heard through friends of friends that other groups of girls at that same festival had complained about somebody in a sports mask hanging around them, not talking, not buying anything, just standing too close and staring. And that's when it really hit me that it wasn't just some random creep who happened to notice us. It was someone who had come there looking for girls like us. And I still have no idea what would have happened if I hadn't had that spray on my keys. For me, this was supposed to be a routine 2-week business trip to a neighboring state where my company was opening a new branch. I was 35, it was last year, and in my head it felt more like a paid break from my usual chaos than anything else. I rented a small apartment through a popular short-term rental app, a studio on the first floor of a 2-story house on a quiet street with small front yards and neat little driveways. The place in the photos looked simple but fine. Bed, couch, tiny kitchen, a basic desk and chair. The neighborhood looked peaceful, almost suburban, even though downtown was only 15 minutes away by car. I live in a noisy city where someone is always honking or yelling, so I was honestly kind of excited about the idea of quiet nights and a short drive to the office. That morning I flew in, grabbed the rental car, and drove straight from the airport to the house. The host had left the key in a lockbox by the front door, so check-in was just punching in a code and letting myself in through a side entrance. Inside, it matched the listing. Clean enough, faint smell of cleaning spray, nothing fancy but nothing sketchy either. There was a short hallway, and then the main room with the bed, the couch, a TV on a low stand, and a sliding door that led to a small patio out back. I dropped my suitcase near the bed, pulled out my laptop and a clean shirt, and walked around once just to see where all the doors and windows were. That's a habit of mine in rentals. I like to know the layout in case of fire or whatever. Nothing dramatic, just routine. I tossed my toiletries in the bathroom, saw that the landlord had left some bottled water and a couple of containers of food in the fridge, checked the time, and realized I was already cutting it close for my first meeting. I decided to unpack properly later. I locked the front door, checked that the back door was latched, and drove to the new office. The day was standard opening week stuff. Slide decks, hiring plans, launch dates, everyone trying to sound confident and a little more upbeat than they actually felt. We went from conference room to conference room until my voice was hoarse and my brain felt like it was running on autopilot. By the time I left, it was already after 8 in the evening, and I just wanted to sit somewhere quiet, eat whatever was easiest, and not talk to anyone for a few hours. When I turned back onto that little street, most of the houses were dark. A few porch lights were on, one car was backing out, a dog barked somewhere further down, but that was it. Exactly how you'd want a temporary neighborhood to feel. Calm, boring, predictable. I parked in front of the house, let myself into the studio, and locked the door again out of habit. Inside it felt slightly cooler than the hallway, a little stale from being closed up, but fine. I went straight to the fridge, grabbed one of the containers of pasta the host had left, heated it in the microwave, and sat on the couch with the plate on my lap. I opened my laptop, pulled up a news stream for background noise, and started eating while half scrolling through emails on my phone. I wasn't really paying attention to the screen. It was just noise, so the place didn't feel too quiet. It was around 9:30, fully dark outside, when I suddenly heard footsteps on gravel from the side of the house, the side where there was no walkway. It wasn't random crackling like a cat or a raccoon. It sounded like slow, deliberate steps. A few crunches, then a pause, then a few more. At first I thought, okay, probably a neighbor cutting across, or maybe someone checking a meter or something like that. But the timing felt off. This was a residential street. Nobody was doing yard work at 9:30 at night. I paused the video, and as soon as the sound from the laptop cut off, the footsteps stopped too. The silence suddenly felt thick. I sat there for a couple of seconds, fork halfway to my mouth, listening hard. Nothing. No more gravel. No voices. No car door. I put the plate on the coffee table, wiped my hands on a napkin, and got up. I walked over to the side window that faced the narrow strip of gravel between the house and the wooden fence. I didn't yank the curtain open like in a movie. I just moved it a little with 2 fingers and looked through the gap. The street light near the driveway threw light over the front lawn and the parked cars, but that side of the house was mostly in shadow. I could see the fence, the neighbor's hedge beyond it, a trash bin near the front corner, and that strip of gravel hugging the wall. No person, no movement, nothing obvious. I held my breath, trying to catch even one more crunch of rock, but all I heard was a distant car somewhere and a faint hum from what sounded like somebody's air conditioner. After maybe 30 seconds of staring at nothing, I let the curtain drop back into place and just stood there, aware of how tense my shoulders were over what was probably nothing. I told myself it was a neighbor or an animal, or just sound carrying weird in a new space. First night in a new place always feels a little off. I went back to the couch, hit play again, and tried to focus on the news, but that easy, half-asleep feeling from earlier was gone. I noticed I kept turning the volume down a notch at a time without really meaning to, like some part of me wanted as much silence as possible. About 5 minutes later, right when I was starting to relax again, there was another sound, this time from the backyard side of the house. A quick scraping against the wall, not loud, but sharp, like something hard sliding briefly along the siding. I muted the laptop immediately. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, pretending it was branches or something, but that felt wrong. If someone was creeping around outside my windows, I wanted to know now, not find out later from a broken lock. I got up again and walked slowly toward the back door that led to the little patio, trying not to make extra noise. I flipped on the exterior light and opened the door halfway. The patio and a strip of grass lit up. I could see the concrete step, the short path running along the wall toward the side gate, and the back fence. Everything looked ordinary. No person ducking away, no trash cans tipped over, no branch even close to the wall. For a moment I just stood there, looking around, feeling stupid and jumpy and telling myself out loud that it was nothing. I was already starting to close the door, hand on the edge, when something on the ground caught my eye. In the damp soil right next to the house was a line of very clear shoe prints pressed deep into the dirt, running along the wall from the yard straight to the living room window. The edges were sharp enough that they couldn't have been there long. Someone had definitely been standing there very recently, maybe only moments earlier, possibly right before I turned on the light. My heart started racing faster. For a second, I just stood there in the doorway, staring at the prints like they were going to come back to life. Then the practical part of my brain kicked in. I stepped inside, shut the back door, turned the deadbolt, then turned it again just to be sure. I pulled the blind down over the glass and went through the place in a loop, closing every curtain, checking every latch and lock. Front door deadbolt, chain on side windows locked. Even the tiny bathroom window over the shower. It wasn't a big apartment, but that walk felt like it took a long time because I kept rechecking things I'd already checked. The next hour I sat in the living room with the TV off, phone in my hand, not really using it. I'd open an app, stare at it, close it. Every little settling sound in the building made me flinch. Every 10 minutes or so I'd get up, go to a different window, lift the curtain a couple of inches, and look out. Same view each time. Quiet street, parked cars, an empty yard. No more gravel crunching, no scraping, nothing moving where it shouldn't. The logical part of me kept saying, "You're safe, everything's locked, nobody's getting in now." The rest of me was stuck on the fact that they'd already been close enough to stand under my window without me knowing. Around midnight, I felt more drained than scared. Sitting in the dark wasn't helping, it just made me more jumpy. I decided I needed to sleep, at least try. Before heading to bed, I did one last walk around. Front door, still locked. Kitchen window latch, still down. Back door, still solid. When I got to the bedroom side window, the one facing the gravel, I almost skipped it. I had this stupid urge to just pretend that side didn't exist. But that felt worse, so I made myself look. I moved the curtain a little and checked outside. The street was empty. Neighbor's porch light, couple cars, nothing else. I was just starting to let the curtain fall back when I heard it. Rapid footsteps on the gravel, directly under that window, heading away fast, like whoever had been there was now sprinting off. I froze, then yanked the curtain wide open. I caught a man's silhouette at the edge of the light, already cutting between the houses toward the backyards. Dark clothes, some kind of hood or hat, head turned away from me. He never glanced back, just ran hard like he knew exactly where he was going. That was enough for me. I backed away from the glass, grabbed my phone, and called 911. I told the dispatcher someone had been outside my bedroom window, that I'd heard them take off and seen a man running. I gave the address, tried to describe what little I'd noticed. She told me to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and wait for officers. Those few minutes between hanging up and hearing the knock felt longer than my whole workday. When the police got there, they parked out front with their lights on, but kept it quiet. 2 officers came to the door. I checked the peephole before letting them in, then went through the story again, step by step, trying not to sound crazy or overdramatic. They had me show them the backyard and the strip of gravel. Their flashlights went along the wall, over the patio, to that line of prints by the living room window, and around the corner. The tracks faded out near the side gate and the fence. One officer pointed out how easy it would be to cut through the neighboring yards without anyone noticing at night. No suspect, no obvious place they'd gone, nothing to chase. Back inside, they said they needed to clear the apartment, just in case. I was fine with that. We went room by room. Bathroom, fine. Kitchen, fine. Then we stepped into the bedroom, and I saw my suitcase on the floor by the bed was unzipped, the lid hanging open. I knew I hadn't left it that way. I remember dropping it closed that morning when I rushed out. I said that out loud, and one of the officers told me to check if anything was missing. I knelt down and went through it. My charger, which I always keep in a side pocket, was gone. A small flash drive with work files that I'd shoved into one of my shoes was gone. Even a dumb company baseball cap I'd thrown in on top wasn't there. The rest of my stuff looked normal. This person hadn't dumped the place or taken valuables, just weird, specific things. Standing there with the cops behind me, it hit me that whoever it was had been in that room earlier, going through my stuff slowly while I sat in meetings, and then came back later just to stand outside and watch. And the only real comfort I had was that I'd noticed him when I did, instead of waking up to him already inside.